I think we should start. My name is Tamme van der Wal. I will be moderating this session. You may have seen that the title has been changed from the original title now to Satellite-Based Monitoring and Cap Controls, because that's what we were focusing on this morning. And I'm very happy that we have with us Jean-Luc Widlowski from DG Agri, and he will be presenting setting the scene and pave the way for the other presenters. So Jean-Luc, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tamme. Going to share my presentation. Can you see? Yes, there we go. So, good morning, everybody. As Thomas said, I'm from DG Agri's Implementation Support and IAX unit, and we are dealing with what we call checks by monitoring, which is the name we use for satellite-based monitoring for cap controls. Now, what better way would be to start such a session than showing what is actually happening right now in 2021 in terms of member states that have opted for controls via satellite. We have 10 member states, and it's twice the amount we had last year. We have large member states that some of which, like Italy and Spain, have been doing checks by monitoring for several years now, and they are gradually increasing the area that is being covered using satellite-based monitoring techniques for controls. We also have 3 lenders from Germany that have joined in 2021, and many of these areas are monitoring not just 1 or 2 direct payment schemes, but there is a tendency here to cover as many as possible of the area-related direct payments and also some of the rural development measures. It's important to bear in mind that none of this was feasible about 4 years ago. So what has changed is basically the deployment of the Sentinels. It seems that my presentation is stuck. I will try my best to move it. Yes, there we go. So in March 2017, the deployment of Sentinel 1 and 2 was completed, and this radically changed the possibility also for cap monitoring. We have wall-to-wall coverage that was feasible for all of Europe. We had relatively short revisit times across Europe, and we had spatial resolutions of 10 meter, while not necessarily in line with the legal requirements for measuring the areas of Parcel. This gave us ample possibility to look at agricultural activities and the conditions of parcels. And of course, Copernicus Sentinel data is free and there's open data access. So we were for the first time in a position to monitor individual parcels through the course of time and have very regular views on the same points on Earth. And that allowed us to use monitoring in a very different way for controls, namely by focusing on prevention. Now, by prevention, I mean that we can use the repetitive viewing of the satellites to detect differences from what should be expected according to the declaration of a farmer and act and try to alert the farmer that there are some differences and help him to remedy the application. The member states realized this very quickly, and in fact, in May 2007, they asked the Commission to make better use of the new technologies for controls. And the Commission responded. Within 1 year, there was a legal framework and allowed to use the checks by monitoring approach as an alternative control method. And it essentially uses Copernicus as the workhorse. The automatic processing is happening all over the member states or Europe using Copernicus Sentinel 1 and 2. And in case there are some inconclusive cases where you cannot come to a conclusive decision where yes or no a certain activity happens, there is the possibility to use geotagged photos or drones or other new technologies to remedy those. Again, the focus is on prevention. member states are communicating via early warnings and alerts to the farmers that there is something that one can see from space that is not quite the way it should be. And the farmer therefore has the ability to either submit contrary evidence or to amend or even modify and withdraw the applications. So there's a reduced risk of penalties. It's a win-win situation for the farmers. For the paying agencies, there's less work effort and cost associated with follow-up efforts for penalties. And also for the Commission, because assurance is guaranteed. Now, in 2020, the European Court of Auditors looked at this kind of approach, and it must have liked it because it recommended to use the checks by monitoring approach, or to promote its use as a key control system among paying agencies. And it went even further. It encouraged the use of the new technologies beyond, let's say, the classical basic payment schemes, the agricultural activities that were used by most member states at that time, to make use of these technologies for environmental and climate requirements, to monitor these also from space. There was a second report coming out last year, which basically said that checks by monitoring covered about 4.7% of the 2020 spending on the direct aid payments. Now, that is not a non-negligible number. Just to give you an idea, for direct payments, on average, the budget was 40 billion euros every year. And area-related schemes, those that you can monitor from space, make up for more than 90% of this. And on top of that, there are area-related schemes from the Rural Development Program. So there is still ample space, ample room for the monitoring from satellite to expand, to cover these controls in the future. The future, however, is more than just using satellites for controls. As you know, the Commission has proposed the use of an area monitoring system as a new element of Ajax in the CAP. And this area monitoring system will allow to deal, obviously, with the two aspects that I have been discussing so far, the provision of support to farmers with early warnings, etc., and also the use of satellite monitoring for systematic checks, as we are doing in the current compliance-based CAP. But satellite-derived information can be used for a whole other range of tasks. For example, the recognition of force majeure, the more targeted update strategy for the land parcel identification system, which we are using to determine areas. There are many aspects that can be addressed with the area monitoring system that is going to use the Copernicus Sentinel satellites again as the workhorse. And it's up to member states to decide which one of these they wish to follow. The Commission itself aligns the AMS and Ajax to the objectives of the CAP, and the next CAP is a performance-based CAP. So our primary purpose, as we see it from the Commission in DG Agri, for the area monitoring system will be to support member states in their reporting obligation for area-related performance monitoring and evaluation indicators. You may have heard of those. They are output indicators that link expenditure to output, and then the results indicators that are more in line with targets that member states are setting up as part of their national strategic plans. Now, this pretty much concludes it for me. Just to wrap up, we have 10 member states that are currently using satellite-based monitoring for CAP controls in 2021. That's twice as much as we had last year. Prevention becomes possible with this approach, and there are benefits for farmers, paying agencies, and EU funds. And the future area monitoring system will allow member states to make even greater use of Copernicus Sentinel data, especially for the reporting obligations on area-related PMEF indicators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. I think that is a great overview of the current scene and the plans of the Commission in the legislation part. Now, of course, this whole wasn't possible if we haven't had time to work on this and experiment with this and develop tools and methods to use remote sensing for this cap control and monitoring. And there's nobody better, I think, than Philippe Loujani to explain to us how did we arrive here and what are the experiences from the earlier checks by monitoring. Philippe, I think you were there already from the beginning of those kind of exercises.
Yes.
So I'm
Some
looking
time
forward
ago.
to your presentation on innovation that takes some time. Please
Okay.
take the floor. Go ahead.
So thank you, Tammy, and good morning to all. So Jean-Luc just introduced the, let's say, the last innovation, checks by monitoring. And when you introduce a new system in the CAP implementation community, it has some implication that I'd like to present here in the name of the whole GTCAP group in GRC. Next slide, please. So you can find different definition of innovation on different representation, but the main message we want to have is it's by no way a short and linear process, a straightforward process. Next slide, please. So one of the main examples we had of innovation are the so-called control with remote sensing. The idea came in the early 90s with the first use of Earth observation for the vegetation, and some colleagues had the idea to use it at that time to control the crop that farmers were declaring, and also with the idea that it could have a deterrent effect, especially having suddenly eye in the sky looking at farmers. So it has been introduced with the CAP reform in '92, together with the new integrated administration system. Obviously, it has been a very progressive implementation, and it took something like 5 years before we can reach an operational system with a well-detailed methodology. And what you have to take into account when you develop that also is that the legislation is also evolving. You have new sensors, new data, new tools, and you have to adapt your method as you're developing the main one. Next slide, please. So in order to work, you have to create practices that work. And in implementing the control, we had to clarify different concepts. So is it technical oriented or user oriented? We had to precise the function of the Earth observation for risk analysis or really on-the-spot check methods. And this is the last one that has been chosen. Then you have really to clarify many gray zones, and it cannot be done without the interaction and the discussion with the member states in order to see the nature of them, test the method in the different contexts, and find solution for and follow-up action for these gray elements. And also, you really need to build clear rules and common standards. And you have here example of elements that have been created for that, classification of dossier codes for the interpretation, the use of technical tolerance, etc. Next slide. So what were the factor of success? In fact, by no way you can have something that is up and running from scratch. So it's really a progressive implementation. You really need to have a contribution from member states with common specification by the Commission in order to better fit the local context and to have member states taking the ownership of the method. And it cannot work without close technical cooperation. So the dialogue between DG Agri, the GRC, the member states. It goes through the organization of workshops and conferences, and it has to be endorsed politically and legally through the discussion in management committee. And also, there is no one standalone technique, so Earth observation was really useful, but the method cannot work if you don't have also other tools, like the introduction of GNSS, or the development of the land parcel system in order to better manage the eligible area. Next slide, please. So you have, I will not detail that slide, but you have here a summary of different elements developed in the unit since 25 years. Yesterday, Bettina presented the crop yield forecast system. You have the on-the-spot check, and you can see that for the good implementation of the on-the-spot, you need to have also other studies, other developments that would sustain the main method and allow to have something that is more efficient and very useful. And you see appearing in 17 the checks by monitoring as presented by Jean-Luc that should pave the way for the future area monitoring system. Next slide, please. So not repeating what Jean-Luc said, but the introduction of Sentinel together with better computing capacity, big data, allows us to present a new system that would replace the on-the-spot check that started to suffer from different critics. It was punitive, unfair, costly, to a system that is more fair, can allow to automated processes, is much more proactive, and out of it, we really expect to have a lot of positive spin-off. Next slide. Thank you. So as for the control of the remote sensing, we find back the same elements. It was born with the idea in 17, already implemented in legislation on 18, and we have a continuous development ongoing. So we had to start to define the precondition to enter in the CBM, like a good LPIS, and tackle the problem of small parcel due to the resolution of Sentinel. We had to define new concept, FOE markers, and we developed the methodology with flexibility by discussing with the member states, and you have a list of elements already implemented and discussed. You have to go to have some incentive also initiative, so like the DIAS onboarding, in order to allow member states to overcome with some problem, ICT problem, so cost of development, and starting to find solution with the unclear cases, so the inconclusive with the introduction of geotag imagery, for instance. Next slide. So I will not go in detail also, but you see that it's a recent development, but already you have a lot of activities and a lot of development ongoing in order to have the checks by monitoring working efficiently. And as I said, paving the way for the future area monitoring system. Next slide. So what is the role of Copernicus in all of that? As I said, it was one of the main catalysts for the initiative. And what is really important now is to ensure the archive, the access, the quality, and the stability of Sentinel data. I already described the role of DIAS as support for the cloud solution. What will be important also is the use of Galileo and EGNOS presented yesterday by Joachim, especially for what concerns the geolocation of information, the use of geotag imagery, and the management of parcel in the system, either the reference parcel or the geospatial application. Are not yet really developed, but the possible use of Copernicus services, like the one presented yesterday by Michael, with the use of products like the phenological stages. Next slide, please. So as conclusion, if you want to have an innovation to take on, you really need to have multi-actors involved in the process. So for the checks by monitoring, you have AGRI, GRC, the member states, and DG DEFIS, and some other people. You really need to define common rules. You have to share and transfer that knowledge. So it means that it's a progressive and long process, especially due to the fact that you have needs coming along the track and you have to tackle them also. But what you have to remember is that the end user must remain the main driver, so you should not be led by technology. And last but not least, one technology is good, but it can't make it all. So Sentinel is the main source of data for the checks by monitoring. But the process cannot be working perfectly if you don't have also some other tools, like the use of geotags or HHR data, or some other elements like the LPIS or the geospatial application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I think that gives an excellent overview and also some aspects to take care of when we are continuing developing these kind of systems. Before we continue, may I remind the audience that if you have questions, that we have Q&A on your service, where you can type your question, and then we can ask them in the end of this session to the panel. So please, if you have any questions about the presentations or you want to contribute to the discussion, please type your question. So our next speaker, I'm very happy that we have David Navria with us. All of this talk is, of course, nothing if you don't have people that stand out and take up the technologies to experiment with it and to demonstrate how it works. And David did this in this region of Castilla y León, and he will give us some ideas and results from that. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tammy, for your presentation. Well, I'm going to introduce briefly what we have done in the last years, or a brief of our history and the things that we learned coming from the perspective of the Commission and the implementation of the check by monitoring. This is about a little bit about the team, who we are and where we are. We are part of I'm working in ITACIL. It's a small research institute that belongs to the regional government, linked to agriculture. There are many institutes like that everywhere in Europe. Every country or region, many regions have that kind of institutes. The region itself, this is the largest region in Spain. You know, Spain is a very decentralized country, so we are the Regional Ministry of Agriculture is a paying agency, and is coordinated by the National Ministry of Agriculture through FIGA. Inside the paying agency, the Regional Ministry of Agriculture, there are like two teams. There is the people in charge of the Ajax, and then us, the research institute, and we are working together to develop this new checks by monitoring system within ITACIL. Inside ITACIL also there are like two teams. There is a team more related to research, innovation, remote sensing, and things like that, and there is another team more related to provide support to the CAP with the LPI's upkeeping and the spot checks and things like that. To do all this on implementation of the checks by monitoring, those two teams has been reinforced. For instance, the CAP support team has 2 more members, and there is 1 more member in the research and innovation team just to support implementation of the checks by monitoring. How did we involve in the checks by monitoring? Well, we were working with remote sensing since probably 2004 or something like that. But in 2014, we developed a new crop map for the whole region based on the USDA crop data layer methodology, and taking advantage of DEMOS-1 and that satellite image. So that gave us a lot of skills in remote sensing, and we realized that we had a product that would be very useful for CAP controls, for changing the paradox of the controls. But at that time, we tried to convince the regional managers and directors of the paying agency, and we were not successful. They didn't support us in the idea of changing because there was not allowed by the regulations and things like that. During 2016 and 17, as it was explained by Jean-Luc before me, we had the Sentinel-2 image availability, on top of that Sentinel-1, so the availability of images came dramatically. European Commission started shifting towards control by monitoring, so there was a big change. 2008, somehow for us was a little bit a lost year because we were ready to monitor. It was possible to do it legally. The regulations were ready to that. But it was a kind of a year that we were developing network infrastructure and testing and things like that. But at the end, we didn't advise quite much because we didn't went operational in 2008. So when Philippe was talking about starting piloting, we did a kind of a piloting in 2018, and it was not quite successful because the involvement of the people is not very deep when you are piloting and you are not operational. Then in 2019, we started operational. We went for a small area in the center of the region, more than 6% of the claim area. We monitored the full first pillar. In 2020, last year, we did a major upgrade in the area monitor. So we went close to the 30% of the claim area. Most of the arable land was covered. and we went for the first and the second pillar. This is what we were officially monitoring, but in the background, we were already processing 100% of the area. So because we foresee that in 2021, this year, we were going to do, and we are going to do 100% of the area. So during 2020, we were preparing ourselves to monitor and compute everything for the whole area of the region, all first and second pillar. One of a key message is that we learned and we did lots of things when we came into operations. And piloting, we lost. It's not that we lost time, but it was not very profitable, let's say. But when we changed to operation, we developed new products, and the involvement of the people was matched it. That slide for me is the most important one. Is what do a paying agency needs to set a monitoring system? This is our perspective. First, you need an upgrade in the farmer's application software. At least, meanwhile, we don't have a claimless system. We are coming from an application world, let's say, So we have the farmer's application software. We updated it with current season image satellite, updated, and we preloaded some markers from previous years, and even with current season land cover classes, so that when the farmer applies, get some warnings that work like a kind of prevention in the moment of the application. That are you sure that what you are applying is correct? Because according to the current land cover, that as you can imagine is not very accurate at this moment of the year when they are starting to apply. But we can guess that there are some strange applications that may not be possible because of the current land cover. Then you have an image downloading and preprocessing scripts to download all the Sentinel images and do some preprocessing. You need to develop all the derived products for crop and agricultural practice identification and monitoring. So what it's set out markers. You need a tool to do vector intersection to store the markers in the monitoring database. It's a new database that you will create next to the Ajax. And you need to set a group of decision rules based in the monitoring database and in the Ajax. In both things, you will read the records that are stored in the Ajax together with the markers and the signals coming from remote sensing to set up the rules for the automatic process. Then you need an expert judgment tool that integrates all the application data with the signals, the markers, and the rules, because you need to the non-conclusive cases needs to be checked by somebody, or you need some kind of human intervention, and you need a tool to integrate all the information and the decisions that were done automatically. And then you need, or it's recommendable to have a farmer interaction application to get notification, you take pictures, and so on. For us, for instance, 0.1 and 0.7 are not essential. You can, it's something that we are deploying. The last year we started to do some prevention activities, and this year we are going to have a farmer interaction app, but that didn't make us to not to do the check by monitoring. There are other parts that are essential. How did we do it? Just the technology that we developed is what we have. I don't think that it's an example for others, but yes, I think it's a good idea to have. The farmer's application software is a web application, and it's with OpenLayer as a viewer, and it's done by the Ajax team. And we have the Sentinel Hub API that it's taken from Sen4Cap to have updated current season satellite image. For image downloading and preprocessing, we have a bunch of scripts to do the downloading. There are manual procedures for most of our some markers are based on classification, to machine learning, and things like that. That's done. Many aspects are done manually. For vector intersection, we have our own scripts in Python based on libraries like raster.io, NumPy, Panda. Decision rules are done in the Oracle database with PL/SQL scripts. So it's pretty similar like the cross checks that were done before. The expert judgment tool is another version of the web app developed by the Ajax team, and the farmers interaction app is a responsive web application with lots of APIs, live connections, and communication with the Ajax. So you want to set up the new system, you have to decide what to keep in the Ajax that you need to upgrade. It's a minor upgrade, but there are things that will be you will need to update the Ajax to store the rules, the traffic lights, and things like that in the Ajax. What to do externally? in a, let's call a new remote sensing segment. And you have to decide where to set up the new external service. You can do your local installation in your premises. That's our case. We have everything locally. We have some software tools in the cloud, but they are not operational, because when we started working on this, we have our infrastructure and DIASs and things like that were not ready at that moment. So we started with what we have. We can go for cloud services that have analysis ready data, like the DIAS. You can take advantages on some APIs provided by other companies. It's important to take advantage of the pre-existing developments. So you have Sem4Cap, the scripts and the collection of script database and APIs developed by the GRC with the GRC CVM that are in the GitHub. But anyhow, you have to be prepared to personalize the markers, develop decision rules adapted to your local conditions, mixing everything in the Ajax. It's a kind of developing a new cross-check system. A key message also is that the view that is being said all the time, this is not just controlling, so it's try to provide all this information and support for the farmers. Based on all the data that we are collecting and the things that we are doing for monitoring, that are for checking or, let's say, controlling, we develop a new tool for mobile phones and desktop computers, so that the farmers can get the image, check their parcels, and have information as the many others that are available in the private sector, but integrated with the Ajax. So this is a new tool that we are developing. We are launching this year. As I said, it's linked to the Ajax. Farmers can download the parcels and things like that. It's a very tricky things because of the security and the user authentication requirements of the Ajax that are very, very tough. It's loaded with lots of in situ data. I think that the paying agencies and regional governments, or national government, can provide lots of in situ data that we have that are available. And that's make the difference with the applications that are ready for the private sector in many cases. Let's say that this in situ data is open, and so that private companies can take advantage of it and include it in their applications. It has the FAST tool developed by the European Commission integrated inside, and the nutrients module of the FAST tool is integrated. It's based on open APIs that are offered for third-party. The meteorological data, soil data, and all this information is offered to other apps and the target is to foster agriculture and digitalization. And this is the final slide. What's the future in Copernicus from the paying agency or a service provider perspective? Let's say that it's obviously that for this use, the idea of the Copernicus is operational, and we are safe and secure that there will be Sentinels 1 and 2 there, and we have spare components so that we are sure that they will be there. It's a very important topic. I mean, I don't want to take it for granted, but I insist that it's a key element for us. There is a big shift from research to operation. I mean, a paying agency goes operational, so it's a kind of operational innovation. You need to innovate and change the procedures, but at the same time, you have to pay. You have to pay on time. And many of the software developments and tools that are done there are based on research. Are based on examples done not during the season. I mean, we have to decide and come to a conclusive situation with all the documentation and everything before September, and that has to be done on time. You cannot, it's not testing. That's an important thing. The idea of the temporal versus spatial resolution improvement in Sentinel-2. In our conditions, we are a Mediterranean area, so we have enough temporal resolution for a paying agency. Probably for a farmer is not enough in winter, but for a paying agency, the temporal resolution that we have with Sentinel-2, for Sentinel-2, for instance, is enough. But we need a little bit more of spatial resolution for small parcels. And we need go further from Sentinel-1 and 2 with new sensor to improve agricultural monitoring. Example for us, monitoring of water use in agriculture is a key element in Pillar 2 and will become much more important in the future. So the land surface temperature mission of Sentinel in the future, and some other that will come for map, for instance, dry vegetation, cover crops that are not green but are dry, vegetation, so multispectral information, hyperspectral information, things like that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I think you've shown quite well that indeed doing the research is not enough. There are lots of things come around the corner when you are starting to operate these kind of systems. And I think it was great that you took us along some of your experiences and lessons learned. Thank you very much. And so now we have had the legislation, we have had the research, we have had the user. So it's now time, I think, to take a peek under the hood. And I'm very happy that we have Gregor Milczynski with us, the director of Synergize, who has also been, I think, one of the early persons to use remote sensing tooling for all kinds of purposes, including the Common Agricultural Policy. So Gregor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you just confirm that you see my screen uninterrupted?
I think so, yes.
Very well. Okay, so hi everyone. As mentioned, I'm Gregor Milczynski from Synergize, and now I'm here to share the kind of the industry view on how to set up this kind of system based on the experiences we gain in setting up one in Slovenia as well as some other paying agencies. Now, what needs to be said is that most of the building blocks for this kind of system are already available, right? You have the methodology well developed by JRC. You have probably most importantly satellite data available. You have cloud infrastructure, both the DIAS as well commercial ones. And if you want to build from scratch, you have, as David mentioned already, some open source tools available, which you can just go ahead and use, like the ones made by JRC or Sam4Cup. Or if you want some open source machine learning library like EOLearn, or if you want to be really fancy, TensorFlow and many, many others. And if you don't want to build things from scratch, you can do it, you can use some existing services, such as Sentinel Hub, which provides data, the satellite processing data in various analysis ready form, or going one step further, the Signal service, which does, I don't know, the cloud cleanup and gap filling, things that are needed for the processing of data. And then the visualization services, which go, again, one step further to present all this information in a way that it's make it possible to make a decision as soon as possible by looking at all this data from a human point of view. Now, there are lots of companies offering different kind of markers from mowing, bare soil, crop classification, parcel segmentation, tillage, and so on, which you can simply order and you get the data. And you also have the applications which you can kind of purchase or lease, such as expert judgment application, the geotech photo application. So all of this is kind of available. But now what we shouldn't forget is that this check by monitoring is not about the technology, but rather about the process, right? The process where we want to go through all the parcels, where typically there are millions of them, and we want to process them as automatically as possible to determine whether they're okay in line with the declaration or not, right? And then, I mean, the machine learning typically is happy when you have 90% accuracy, but this means that 10% of the parcels, which might be 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of parcels, need to be checked manually, which is still a lot of work. And I mean, what you need to do is go through all the yellow parcels and then determine via other means, like, I don't know, field visits or photo interpretation or geotech photo application to get this information so that you can determine whether they're green or the red ones. And this is what the checks by monitoring is all about, not the technology, right? Technology is really just a helper. What we realized is that it's good to have a traffic system in place as soon as possible, because this kind of guides also which markers are needed. And I mean, this needs to be developed for each and every measure that you are that you want to control. And then within the measure, you would typically split it by different kind of crop groups or the land cover types, and then set up the rules, which need to be easy to understand for a human being, right? So this is not again, a machine learning process, but rather a simple ruling engine, which should be interpretable by a person. Now, one other thing that we realized is that it's good or essential to involve the paying agency in the process as soon as possible and to the like in depth. what we are seeing here is the labeling application. We did ask the paying agency staff to do some labeling, a task that could easily be done by someone else, like outsourcing and so on. But we asked them to do that, and because so that they were able to kind of understand the complexity of the data, the different of the variability of the images, we set up the things so that it was as easy as possible to use. And I think this was really essential so that they really get deep in it, right? Because in the next step, what they will need to do, or they need to be doing, is going through the expert judgment application, which is a similar process. You see the similar set of data to make then the decision about the yellow parcels, right? Now, this is something where you need to go through, I don't know, let's say tens of thousands of parcels, so it needs to be as fast as possible. So we set up things so that they can get information fast, like which kind of traffic rule is being used, all the data, and then it usually takes about 30 seconds to make a decision on something, if obviously it can be done from the photo interpretation data. Now, one other thing that we realized is that the markers which were typically mentioned in the past, like crop type classification and alike, are maybe not the most essential ones. I mean, yeah, they're often talked about, but they are not really the ones that are most important. And there are some that are much more simple, yet they become important. One of them is homogeneity, right? We check whether the parcel is homogeneous or not. I mean, typically this will show that there are a couple of crops growing on the in the same parcel, which is not a problem per se, but will distort the signal, and so all the rest of the things will probably be noisy, right? But then what you will also find is that there are parts of the parcel which are overgrown or are becoming a build-up area or something like that, which is ineligible area, and that's super important. One other thing that we struggled quite a bit was mowing. I mean, detecting a mowing on a parcel level is now well developed, and you can simply look for, I don't know, when the NDVI falls down and something like that. But what we realized is that that's easy if the parcel is moved at once. But what happens is that you have parcels that are moved at several times simply because they're too large or from whatever other reason. So what we now do is that we combine the parcel level mowing with the pixel level mowing so that we see for each and every pixel when it was mowed, and then we combine this data to kind of get all the mowing events within the parcel as well. And this made it possible to significantly reduce the number of yellow parcels that remain at the end. Now, another very important point is that when you have these tools in place, that you integrate them in a kind of a feedback loop. I mean, every expert judgment that is done needs to be used to improve the markers and improve the traffic light system rules, because this makes it possible to improve through time, because it will for sure not be perfect from the beginning. And it's good to involve farmers in this process as soon as possible, because they have obviously much better knowledge about what's happening, and then they provide this feedback that we are searching for, or they just update the declarations, right? Now, looking at this presentation, one would think that everything is available and we just can use it. And I would say that we are really not far from it. I mean, if a year ago, it was still okay kind of to say, oh, there are so many problems, let's just wait for others to solve them before we go into that. But now I would be willing to say that all the generic parts really are already available. I mean, available by many vendors in open source, different means that you can just make and use it. But as David mentioned, there is a lot of adaptation needed for the local specifics, because no country is the same. You have different rules, different climate, and it takes time to adapt this because it's kind of the iterative process. One other thing that we shouldn't forget is that one thing is to set up the technology and to come up with the red, yellow, and green parcels. But then you need to somehow integrate this in procedures and legislation, and this proves to be quite more difficult than what one might imagine, right? I mean, it's sometimes not the technology that's most difficult, but rather all these procedures around it. Now, the Commission and ESA did a very good job, I think, up to now, but I think that even for them, the work is not yet done. First of all, what needs to be assured is a long-term Sentinel archive. I think this is essential, and it's now not really clear because the DIAS contracts are somehow being expiring, and it's not clear when it will happen. Here we are talking about full archive, right? Not 18 months or 24 months, but rather all years that need to be available, at least for Europe, right? Because we are talking about check by monitoring in European Union. One other thing that I'm looking forward is for Sentinel-2C to be launched so that it will reduce the revisit time even more. Now, one thing that we all should do is to exchange information and knowledge much more often. I mean, this is a kind of a research project. It's not just doing it, it's a lot of iteration, a lot of research. And I think that we should go deeper, exchanging our experiences, exchanging our technology and our lessons learned. And we should do this as often as possible. So I think that, yes, things are in place, hack can be used, but there is a lot of work needed, and the deadline, like that when this needs to be used, that it's not kind of optional, but rather mandatory, is coming, and it's just should start as soon as possible. Now, one other thing that we shouldn't forget is that the checks by monitoring is not just about which of the farmer will get paid and which not. What we are really looking for is for farmers to change the agriculture practices because of the information that we provide to them. And this, I mean, as soon as this happens, the better it will be for all of us. Anyway, I'll conclude here. Some links for further information, and looking forward for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grega. I'm very happy that you bring the human in the loop for all this technological violence, I would say, to keep on checking what we're doing and to keep on improving the technology. And I'm also very interested in continuing with the discussion, especially with your requests for long-term archives and Sentinel-2C. And of course, there's nobody else better to start our panel discussion than Sebastian Kutz from ESA. I don't know if you're already giving an answer to when Sentinel-2C will be launched, but you've been listening to those 4 keynotes of this session, and you have the floor to give a short reaction. I don't know if you have slides even to join.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom. I would love to kick off the discussion with a couple of slides from our side, if that's possible. I understood the organizer will present my slides. Seeing them. Okay, thank you. Now, I just wanted to take this opportunity in this discussion part to reflect shortly on how this, this process of using the Sentinels for the CUP, so I mean in this case, Sent4CUP project, is very essential in terms of a learning process. It is something which we started in 2017 on request of DG Agri and during that time DG Grow, and it really led to a European cooperation. I think actually also reflecting very much on the panel which we have today, because every single person which has been talking today on the session has been involved, and it was an essential contribution to this process. So next slide, please. As ESA is the R&D agency, we are very much interested in connecting the expertise and technology to actually really making sense out of it. So the first part is really in Sent4CUP, we link to the paying agencies, 7 of them actually being selected by DG Agri in terms of representing the different heterogeneity in Europe. But then we also had a steering committee composed by JRC, DG Agri, and DG DEFIS, who gave us the right guidelines and leading how, what to focus on. And JRC, certainly with their technical expertise to give the guidelines, was very essential. But then also to bring together the different Earth observation expertise, we brought together a scientific, industrial, and EU service consortium, which was really important, and Synergize just showed it as well, who was one of the contributors. So bringing together the technology is, basically the Copernicus satellites, open source data set, not only data sets, but also the algorithms, which are modular, which can be used as as parts to support different implementation in the cloud like DS, but also locally as, for example, Spain, David just has showed, he's using part of the modules in his implementation to bring a national monitoring capability to do, in this moment, support the check by monitoring approach at national scale. There were 15 million parcels being used to demonstrate and validate these performance of these different algorithms. Next slide, please. So really, we started in 2017 with high expectations from Commissioner Hogan, who expected useful knowledge, just like Gregor was alluding to, that we need to exchange this knowledge, how to use the Sentinels for the CUP. We consulted users, we really changed our point of view, how to do that in use cases, presented it at the direct payment committee to the member states, and then demonstrated it over 7 different countries across Europe landscape. And now we have 22 paying agencies tested the system, and also even service providers being taking this up to actually not start from scratch, but to use whatever is useful in this open source modular system to make the uptake easier. So just to conclude with the next slide, I would like to show you how that kind of is an ongoing learning process and actually can be used also in terms of on national scale to monitor. So perhaps leading from the check by monitoring to the area monitoring system. Here during the COVID times, we used the Sen4CUP system to verify if there was any disruption on the winter cereal harvesting in Spain. And that was really easy to be done by the available tools, knowledge, which we developed together as a community, put it on the DS, and that gave weekly monitoring, harvest monitoring, and luckily couldn't find like significant disruptions. All that being shared together with the European Commission on our COVID4EU dashboard, which we try to share this information and knowledge with the whole community. So with that, I think we can start a very common discussion how we can bring Sentinels and the future Sentinel generations as well into the use of the common agriculture policies. Thanks for this intervention.
Thank you. Thank you, Benjamin. I think that is a wonderful overview. And our next speaker is Daniel Quintar from DEFIS. I think, Benjamin, you and your ESA colleagues, you have designed the Sentinels, but Daniel and his colleagues have paid for it. So I'm very interested to learn, Daniel, how do you look at these presentations and what is your point of view on this?
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot. And a few reflection. Of course, not only we have paid for it, but also we have put the regulatory in place. And on personal basis, I was involved in the data policy and drafting the data policy, the free, full, and open, which was not at the time fully acquis. But in drafting and putting in the implementation, many people were saying, okay, the free, full, and open, this is good. But in reality, the issue is, of course, getting access to the data, processing the data and the knowledge. So around the availability of the data, it was a kind of starting point where people would need also to invest a lot of effort in their infrastructure and also in the knowledge how to process the data. And that we have seen with the surge of demand for the Sentinel and for Copernicus data and information, some of the elements in our infrastructure were not scalable. The idea to have the collocation of the data with computing powers to allow communities to grow on top of such infrastructure came about, and then the DIAS were designed. And this idea, as we have seen, is really put the maximum of data, put knowledge of the communities together. When we launch it, we've been using European cloud provider, and it took some time to establish themselves. And also there was a learning curve for all of them. So They were signed in 17, then operational in 18, and progressively becoming more and more efficient in what they are doing. When DG Agri and the GRC came to us and discussed how we could support this check by monitoring, that was really very good news. I mean, this application check by monitoring makes real sense and use of the availability of the Sentinels using both Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2. So this is with I mean, great interest that DG DEFI came providing some means to support this. Of course, I'm not at all an expert in this field, and most importantly was all the work that has been already described this morning, for which, of course, I find that extremely interesting, in particular, looking also at what our colleague at Galileo and GNSS are providing as information. So overall, this is really looking an excellent development, very interesting, and putting every type of aspect with the free, full, and open, with cloud computing, colocalization, and the analysis of the data together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I think it's very interesting to see how Commission is operating all these kind of things and taking care of these aspects, and also in collaboration with ESA. So it's an interesting development and quite well, maybe quite unique even. Wim de Vos from the German Research Center. You were the organizer of this session. You've been listening to the speakers of your selection, and we had some reactions already. What are the key points for the discussion further on, Wim?
Thank you, Tom. I've written some keywords down, which I will try to mention, because then it probably offers a good basis for the further discussion. So if I need to list 3 points, I would say first, I mean, what we are witnessing is a game changer. So a kind of complete overhaul of the system. And keywords I noted there on the changes are that it is end user driven. It has a huge financial impact. It only works in collaboration with several complementary tools and solutions. The impact is not technology driven, but the real challenge, as Gregor said, is also the organizational co-development and restructuring needed. And obviously in this time, it relies on automation. So these are all things that require whole organizations. If you think about the Ajax, I think there are something like 2,500 on the spot check inspectors in Europe, with all the people paying. So this is a huge community that has to feel or address the impact or undergo the changes. Then what the changes really mean is, again, what I saw, that we are moving from looking at the spatial, the cartographic elements, to the temporal dimension. Also seen by the elements, we are trying now to look, to read, to automate how to extract information from the time, from the behavior. That's the definition of marker. To make this suitable, we also was mentioned the importance of really the individual local tuning. Okay, in fact, it's like targeted extraction on a parcel or holding by holding basis, per scheme, per holding, as Gregor mentioned. So that's really the essence of why the game changed. We go from on the spot check status observations to monitoring the behavior. It's in the definition. And then the third major aspect that I would mention is about the role of Copernicus. So it was mentioned it is paid for DEFIS, it's actually paid for by the member states, to be cool. So they are the end users. But so how can this now be the open and free data source? It's actually being de facto kind of monopoly. It's the workhorse for this game-changing and moving processes. So how can we now guarantee the long-term service availability, whether it is through this long-term archive, as being mentioned, or through the continuation of the quality of service by the, will we have frequency, will we have error corrections? And then I would add one thing which I did not hear here is, okay, how do we, how can Copernicus, the future, the community who pays for the financer, as Daniel mentioned, how can we tackle the future access or even interoperability of those data which are at the basis of all that in that longer term time frame? Because we're not talking about the duration of a typical project of 2 or 3 years. We're talking about, as Philip showed, a transition that lasts. We are now after 4 years and we are at half. So it will take another 4 years to take then the AMS comes. So we're talking about guaranteed serviceability of a decade or a decade and a half. And I think these are the points I wrote down from the presentation, and I hope it serves to trigger some discussion. Thank you, Tama.
Thank you, Wim. Thank you. Yeah. Maybe let's start with that last point, because I think in the as Philippe described in the control with remote sensing or by remote sensing was a useful tool, but now we're changing that to remote sensing to be the core of CAP monitoring and control. So maybe David, how did you consider that fact in your organization when you were operationalizing the checks by monitoring?
To be honest, for a penny dimension, I think it's not quite difficult to store all the information that you're using season by season. I mean, we are storing like 10 terabytes of images per year. There are, I mean, the government has a large account for cloud backup, so we are storing the database. Also, you have to keep in mind that most of the information that is relevant for the Ajax is stored in databases that have their backups and everything. So only if you have to you need to go back to the images 5 years after. You will need to recover them, but most information is already stored in the information that you need for the decision is in a database. Okay,
so you're not so concerned about the access and the long-term archive.
I'm not with the current spatial resolution. I'm not. I mean, we are updating the orthoimaginary every 3 years with 25 centimeter pixels and things like that, and yeah, we were used to that.
Okay. Thank you. And Jean-Luc, did you agree? How do you look at these issues of the continuity of the space systems and the ground segments?
Hello. Yes. So I think from DG Agri's perspective, the requirement to keep data for a certain period of years is in the legislation. So as such, it's a legal requirement. Technology is advancing. It probably becomes easier as time goes by. For reanalysis, it is in all cases a useful tool. However, I think it's linked a little bit to the last issue that Wim was mentioning, that is long-term continuity. Long-term continuity of Copernicus means also usage in other contexts than the CAP, and the storage of, let's say, Copernicus application-ready data over longer periods for paying agency or by member states can play a role in various application contexts that are tangentially touching upon the CAP objectives of the future, i.e. environment or climate related aspects, and therefore they are relevant. The actual number of years for which such data should be stored is currently still under discussion. So it is not by any means determined what would be the number of years in the end that would end up in the documents, in the legal requirements. And as to the technical possibilities on how this is achieved, I guess there are more specialist people on the panel that have opinions on that.
And Jean-Luc, if we look ahead, because all these member states, all these paying agencies, all these 2,500 controllers that lose their job because we use Sentinel, I'm exaggerating a little bit, of course, but are you not concerned that this change gets difficult if we don't have a secured ground segment and space segment, and how do you are you not worrying about that?
Okay, I didn't quite understand the link between the ground segments, security, and the jobs of possible controllers. I think change is, as far as the CAP is concerned, change is inevitable. We have new technologies. It's like saying, I'm going to continue using my horse if I have a bus that can bring me to the city a bit faster. So change is inevitable, and people will, at their own speed, move to accepting these new technologies. And that involves, to a certain degree, a continuation or a reduction of some of the jobs that have been existing in the past. It will be a reassignment to new tasks. We have seen the presentation of Gregor that there has to be a training needed in the paying agencies for looking at some of these yellow cases to make sure that decisions are being made. And depending on the kind of scope of CAP schemes, let's call it interventions, that are going to be monitored in future, this number may be bigger or smaller and may require different kinds of expertise. It may be envisageable that some paying agencies decide to have their own members or controllers going into the field and actually acquire geotagged photos. We know that this has happened, and it may be a solution in the future. There's a large degree of flexibility given to the paying agency to sort out and set up the systems so that they accommodate both the interventions that they want to monitor from space and also to take account of, let's say, the working condition that is existing in their institutions.
Okay. So let's take your analogy of going to the city. So Benjamin, Jean-Luc just chose the bus to drive to the city, and he sold his horses. So should he be concerned that he never get to the city anymore after a certain stage?
I would not say so, because actually Copernicus, thanks to the investment of the European Commission, is set up as a long-term operational system. So in the moment we have the Sentinel A, B, C, and D units being fully funded and in preparation, continuity ensured up to 2030 and beyond. And right now we're talking also about what the next generation of the Sentinels should be, in ensuring that first and most importantly, the continuity of Sentinel-1 and 2 in this context, also the other families as well. But for for the CAP, Sentinel-1 and 2 certainly are the main parts, workhorses, and that's analogy. But I think also what was mentioned, for example, by David, is that we as a society, we should also look into new challenges, like the increasing climate change pressure on water resource management, which David was mentioning with the land surface temperature monitoring mission, which is one of the proposed Sentinel expansion missions, which would increase the capability to monitor the impact and performances of the CAP in the future in terms of irrigation, water resource management, and pollution, which is related and connected to the leaching of fertilizers into the groundwater, for example. So I think there's a lot of things which we can do to continue, but also to expand and improve. I have not mentioned the hyperspectral and the L-band capabilities, which all will be relevant for the monitoring from space of agriculture in the future as well. So I think we are in a very, very strong position as Europe, way beyond than the international space agencies or space Europe for space. That's what we are, not as only space agencies, which we can show and lead the way how we can use it for agriculture sustainable management.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Daniel, you mentioned the DSS as a good solution to bring the technology and the users together and as a way to access the data. How are we looking at the continuation of the DSS? Because I think the contracts are finishing next year.
Yes. the actual contract for the ESA procured DSs are finishing this year in December. Of course, things have changed. There has been an evolution, which is very interesting. I'm going to contextualize a little bit. So since the DSS pioneer, the use of the cloud nowadays has been really a change also in the ground segment of ESA. Benjamin was talking about the future. Of course, we look at the past as well and keep the archive available for a very long time and make them still usable for the user. So at the moment, of course, there is an intense reflection on the evolution on those infrastructure because we have seen a lot of possibilities now to count on the ground segment capacity since it is cloudified and then with the GIAS for the user as exploitation means. So the reflection is there. I've said that they are on ESA part, then they are also on EUMETSAT, CMWF Mercator Ocean ADS, which is called WIKEO, and they are making as a federation of those services. They still need to link to Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, which is of interest for this community here. At the moment, the access is absolutely granted. And so all of the DSs can provide access to all of those that are. Now, indeed, there are reflections, but it's really to have a better solution, and we see that we have more means because really the technology is advancing. There is an uptake in those cloud, the cloudification of those systems. So I cannot tell you exactly how things will be in the future. The only thing I can say is that really, I mean, those technology, the just functionalities are there. They are extremely useful, and we will continue to build on such type of functionalities for the future service to the users.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before we go to the questions from the audience, because I think we have quite an interesting list of questions. Gregor, with all these developments going on, and you mentioned also the development of open source software and the supply of open data, do you see a change of the role of the industry for these kind of developments?
Well, yeah, I'd say there is a change. I mean, industry was supporting paying agencies like for decades now in these processes, and this will not change. Where there are changes, though, is that I think that now with the check by monitoring approach or even wider area monitoring, you can kind of productionize the solutions better, right? You can make semi-generic solutions. I mean, as mentioned, these things still need to be customized for the individual countries. But there are some elements which can be generic. As an example, I mean, our Sentinel Hub is being used by a couple of agencies. David mentioned one, and there are a couple of others. And they use this without actually working with us individually. They just use service as it is. And there will be more and more services like this available that will offer kind of solutions up to that point. That being said, there will be a significant part of the process which will still have to be done within the paying agency and their contractors, probably existing ones. So, I mean, there will not be a significant change, but yes, there are some elements which will be offered generically, which hopefully will also make it possible to advance faster. What is also changing is that if previously, I mean, the contractors of the paying agencies were mostly just IT developers, right? So software based on what the paying agency asked them to do. Now there is more and more of this proactive approach needed, more and more machine learning know-how, remote sensing know-how, which was previously kind of less relevant for it. And now this is becoming more and more important.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's have a look at the questions from the audience. I don't know if the organization can share them with us. Yeah, there they are. So as the audience have seen, you can ask questions, but you can also vote questions, and the top voted questions are on top. So we have one from Marcel Meijer from the Dutch Paying Agency, and he says there are many projects, but what I miss is continuity. So Sen4CAP is coming to an end, but development and refinement is still needed. So how is this issue addressed? That's a very good question, Marcel, but I'm not sure who in the audience is able to answer that.
Perhaps I can just shortly comment on the Sen4CAP
Yes, please.
future. It's as a project as it has been put in place in response on DG Agri's request is coming to an end. So we're not going to do these like full support of demonstrations and so on. But as a community type of tool, which I think it has really started to be available and being used, we will support it still. We will maintain the open source code, and we make it available on the Agriculture Virtual Lab. So that is kind of a platform where people can keep on developing and doing R&D, build upon the existing tools. And as an R&D agency, as what ESA is, we will also continue to work with stakeholders and companies and paying agencies to make that more useful in terms of capabilities.
Thank you. Yeah, also to comfort Marcel, we have this NIVA project, NIVA for CAP, which is besides developing some more tools and open source instruments, it also is trying to develop a community to continue working together. We have the experience now of working with 9 paying agencies together, developing on tools and testing on tools and exchanging knowledge. And I think that is a basis for continuation as well. So hopefully that can lead to solving this issue.
If I may add, Tamer?
Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
I mean, just to comment on this, this is always a problem with projects, right? And these are projects, but I think that the role of the project, and Sen4CAP was a very nice example of that, was to demonstrate how things can be done and to push the activities. And I think at some point there should be the industry which will take over the lead, and they will start working on not the projects, but rather solutions on their own basis. And I see that this is already happening, right? And it's not just us doing it, but there are many other. And the projects that you are mentioning, both Sen4CAP, NIVA, and alike, they are producing tools that can either be used as an open source or just as a kind of showcase how things can be done, getting lots of research from it, which helps all the other companies doing it. And again, I think that things are now at the stage that the industry can take over fully and just start working on the solutions, and it's happening already.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we have another top voted question now. It's coming from Estonia, from Leah Halik, if I pronounce it correctly. In Estonia, farmers destroy existing biodiversity features in the agricultural landscape to better comply with satellite-based CAP and monitoring. Is that a solution that we want? Maybe Jean-Luc, question to you.
Yes, it's a very interesting question. I was a bit perplexed by it because Estonia does not officially do checks by monitoring. At least they have not notified us, so I do not know exactly where the link comes between the satellite-based CAP area monitoring and the possible destruction of biodiversity. Now, it is definitely in the remit of the member states to define what kind of interventions are feasible and not feasible using checks by monitoring, and that will be even more so in the future. We are in a process of moving responsibility, subsidiarity to the member states. So the Commission, let's go, meaning in the future you have national strategic plans that try to achieve the overall objectives of the CAP. And one of these, or several of these, are linked to environmental, to climate and sustainability. And it is up to the member states to define the kind of means, the kind of intervention it would like to see in the environment that is governed on the territory they are responsible for.
Yeah.
So how is this done? Sentinel-based monitoring is one solution. From the point of the Commission, we think at new technologies as a whole being a package to address various issues. And you could very well conceive a solution for biodiversity using Galileo, EGNOS, and smartphones, where you have images being taken, or even
Yes.
from farm machineries of, let's say, the number of flowers in an area or something like this, and that this could be uploaded and automatically analyzed using some indicators to count flowers. I'm talking here at the top of my head, but there are solutions with a variety of new technologies that can be used to address issues like biodiversity. This link between destroying biodiversity in order to accommodate a new technology, it doesn't have to exist. In fact, it shouldn't exist.
No.
We are not encouraging it.
No. Well, we have in the past we have seen similar experiences in other countries as well. So I think it's a threat, but I agree with you. It's a good thing that we have not we're not completely relying on satellite data, but we can use auxiliary data like smartphone photos or machine recordings to support that the farmer is still able to claim the eligible area that he needs. We have another very technical question from David Herman from GAF. And he asked a question, I think it's directed to you, Benjamin. When can we expect geometrically refined Sentinel-2 data using the validated global reference image and the new Copernicus 10?
Yeah, I think that's that can be answered quite straightforward. I mean, the global reference image is ready. That is good. It's validated and ready, and the new Copernicus DAM is also already available to everybody to download. And these two elements together with the cloudified ground segment of the Copernicus Sentinels will allow now to kick off the collection 1 processing of Sentinel-2, and that will be kicked off in the second half of this year, which then will start progressively to deliver these geometrically refined Sentinel-2 data during this year still.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another question on the subject of small parcels. Well, that is always a touchy item, I think, in these kind of discussions. But so therefore, maybe Wim, you are the best person to answer that. The question is, the small parcels are not well defined, or it's a command. But what are small parcels and how are we dealing with that in these monitoring systems?
Thank you, Pam. Okay, the small parcel problem originates from the original mapping requirements. So, and then the half hectare is there because it's a minimum mapping unit that you use on a 10-meter resolution type of image source. However, as the experiences with the CBM have demonstrated, and following the processing that Grega kind of disturbed, we find out that we come to a conclusion for a vast majority of those parcels where you would not be able to map them. But in order to qualify whether or not the information is sufficient to conclude on the legitimacy of the payment, that number has never been in any of the experience we have so far being limiting. So it is not a problem as such because it does not trigger a huge overload of problems in the overall processing of the applications. And we have looked in alternative solutions, including higher resolution parcels to look at the small ones, and we did not find an improved conclusion. So it's a conceptual problem. It's a perceived problem more than a operational problem. So maybe David will be able to confront that. So they don't prove to be a real problem. Yes, we do have non-monitorable aspects things we cannot see because the phenomena do not clearly show on the sentinels, but that is much less. Okay, if you look at the degree of inconclusiveness between the big parcels and the small parcels in particular member states that do the check by monitoring, I think it's only fourfold. It's only 4 times as many at parcel basis, not at area basis, 4 times as many small parcels that do not conclude as the big parcels of the equivalent nature. So in the overall picture of things, when it goes about assurance of the finance, assurance of the compliance of the cap, they are not a prohibitive problem. Okay, but now I would, I have the word, sorry, Tam. I would like to add something on the question on the Estonian biodiversity loss through to the sentinels. And I think the real reason why we go to checks by monitoring is not only to get the compliance, but also since we move from compliance to this performance.
Yes.
Checks by monitoring is in fact much more appropriate to allow the farmers to gain their biodiversity in the fields. Because you have to tell me how a farmer, what is different between the current on-the-spot check, where we look at the field with a 25 centimeter resolution, and where we look with a 10-meter resolution, which are the types of biodiversity that we're going to be able to detect on the 10-meter that we were not being able to detect on the current 25 centimeter. So I think there's a need to communicate correctly there that the monitoring is not driving, should not be driving the farmers to reduction of heterogeneity features in their fields. On the contrary, we kind of accept that we will not be able to detect them, and it should essentially allow the farmers to be better preserving their practices, or more appropriately performing their practices they paid for, rather than cleaning up the spatial territory they are handling. So the easy question is, why would the monitoring be worse than what we currently have with field inspection or control with remote sensing? Okay, and I'll stop. So I answered 2 questions now.
Yeah.
Is the risk of giving me the word, Stamme? Thank you.
Can I? David.
Yes, David, go ahead. Yes.
Regarding the small parcels, I mean, it's an important topic, but we have the financial thresholds that are set and help a lot with solving the problems with the small parcels. That's the first thing. So that you may have many parcels, but the economic impact of those are small, so you can overcome to them for applying the financial thresholds. Other issue that we came to the idea that pixel-based classification provide us some insights about small parcels that object-based sometimes cannot give you. And regarding the last thing about Estonia, I was worried somehow because deletes is an issue, a practice that is very easy to monitor. It's a clear signal that we get. So somehow we are promoting deletes, and we are checking more, and we have a better knowledge of what's happening in the fallow land and in the abandonment areas. So, but that's not related to monitoring. It's related to the CAP itself, because it goes beyond. Because we want to promote biodiversity, but we don't want abandonment at the same time. That is a great source of biodiversity. So somehow I understand the point of Estonia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think we should conclude with the latest question, the last question that we have, and that's from Maria Östergaard from Kobo-Kojeka. And she is interested in what she mentions, that the CAP 23 is still under negotiation. This trilogue is ongoing. And will we have a sufficient legal frame to utilize Sentinel data to create benefits, guidance, less sanctions, smart regulations for farmers? I can't think of any person better than Jean-Luc to answer that question. And with that, I think we rounded our session. Jean-Luc, can I give you the last word? Jean-Luc already left us, or not?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, apologies. I think the question, the way it's formulated, includes already the answer. It's still under negotiation. So the Commission made a proposal, and the Council and the European Parliament have their positions on this, and they differ slightly. For example, on the link of the area monitoring system to control, let's say, and that has to be resolved. However, so far nobody has questioned the AMS system itself. It's a logical conclusion of the checks by monitoring approach, which is increasingly being seen as a good thing by paying agencies and member states. Why is that? It's because initial fears that somehow were there, whether they were related to yellow parcels or other things, have, so to speak, evaporated. Technologies are becoming more standard, and it's as Gregor said, it's probably now just a matter of moving from the research and development to letting the private sector do the job. So the area monitoring system, as far as we can see, is going to remain in the CAP proposal. At the same time, we have, and I mentioned this already before, more subsidiarity to the member states to define the kind of interventions that they want to implement in line with the strategic plan that are agreed with the DG Agri. And then, as a third step, it is how you go about using the new technologies to monitor this. And as I said, a priori, we are focusing primarily on the Sentinels, because the Sentinels were what kickstarted this all, and the Sentinels are the working horse of all the monitoring we are doing. But this does not mean that that is the way you make an intervention in the future monitorable. There are other new technologies that exist. We haven't mentioned Internet of Things. We haven't mentioned a lot of these things, and they are going to progress more and more, and they will come in the next couple of years, and they will complement the satellites. So I think a lot of elements are possible. Services to farmers are possible. Already farmers benefit from the prevention approach that we have in the current checks by monitoring. And just to let you know, we have just amended the regulation that permits farmers to modify their application in case checks by monitoring detects some inconsistency over a parcel, but not only for those schemes that are officially under checks by monitoring, but also other schemes that may not even be officially declared under checks by monitoring for that same parcel. And it's the paying agency that can set the dates by which this can happen. So already there is a shift of responsibility from the EU level to the member states and the paying agency, and this will happen even more in the future, to determine in particularly what are the best new technologies to do a proper monitoring of the interventions without any damage to the overall CAP objectives. And I think with this I conclude.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. I think that's a very nice conclusion of the session. We've seen today that the Sentinels, when they were launched today, the Commission took the opportunity to adjust the regulations or expand the regulations to take up monitoring from satellites. We've seen how that is progressing in science and in technology from the industry. And we also have seen how, with the example of Castilla y León, how this will not only aid the control, but also improve the interaction between government and farmer to discuss about the performance of the CAP, and that's what we're all after, I think. So with that, I would like to thank all the speakers, all the panelists, and of course the audience for participating in this session. We are 4 minutes over time. That means that you have only 6 minutes left for taking your coffee and your bio break. And then we'll reconvene at 10 minutes past 11 with our next session on environment, climate, forest, and bioeconomy. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the last session of the Copernicus and the Common Agricultural Policy Workshop. So this session will be a session with a focus on the environment, climate, forest, and bioeconomy aspects. Before we start the session, I just would like to introduce myself. So my name is Ivan Konakchiev, and I work in the Earth Observation Unit of the DG DEFIS in the European Commission. I am responsible for the pan-European component of Copernicus Land Service, and it is my pleasure to guide you during this hour and a half, and hope it will be interesting as were the other 3 sessions for you. So we'll have several speakers to address the topic in question. First, we'll have 3 presentations from Mr. Isidro Campos Rodriguez from the European Commission in DG Agri. Then we'll have Mr. Chris Stenmans from the European Commission from the European Environment Agency. And we'll have finally Ms. Chiara Cagnazzo from ECMWF. Then we'll move to a panel with 6 panelists who will take part in our discussion. So namely, we'll have Mr. Jean-Michel Terret from the European Commission DG GRC. We have Mr. Simon Kay from the European Commission DG Climate. Then Mr. Eric Sechia from the French Center for Special Studies and Biosphere, Mr. William Clemens from Rise AG, a company based in Paris, Miss Maria González Dugo from the Spanish Institute of Agriculture and Fisheries Research and Training, and finally we have also Mr. Stefan Erasmi from the Tunen Institute in Germany. Now, I will not spend more time on the presentation of our speakers now, and I will introduce them later on. But I will move to our first speaker. So we have Mr. Isidro Campos Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez, you are policy officer in the European Commission, DG Agri, and you are working in environment, climate change, forestry, and bioeconomy unit. Your tasks are related to the use of external inputs in agriculture and the development of the farm sustainability tool for nutrition in the CAP post-2020. I will invite you to open the session with setting the scene and share your experience with the audience. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you please confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, I see it here.
Okay, perfect. So let me to start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak in this workshop. As mentioned, my name is Isidro Campos Rodriguez, and I'm working in Agri D4. I will try to present during this short speech what are the opportunities we see about the use of remote sensing data for the task or for the files where we are responsible in DG Agri. To present our needs or view about these needs, it's important to have in mind what is the mission of Agri D4. From one side, our mission is to promote the integration of climate change and environmental concerns in the CAP, but also in other legislation on EU level related with these issues. No? From the other side, our mission is to implement the EU forest strategy, and it includes the development and implementation of measures about forestry in the CAP, but also in other policy initiatives at EU and international level. Respect to the question related with bioeconomy, we follow up and contribute to develop several aspects of the renewable energy, bioeconomy, and circular economy policy, also in the same policy initiatives. No? Finally, we are responsible for the implementation of the farm sustainability tool for nutrients in the common agricultural policy. As you can see now, our areas, the areas of interest for us are related with mapping land covers and land uses related with this task, no, with climatic change and environmental concerns. We are interested also about the potential application of remote sensing data to get or to obtain information about management practices, ongoing processes, and management practices in forestry, but also in agricultural areas. And of course, because of this component of contribution or help to farmers, we are interested in the use of remote sensing to facilitate or to contribute to taking decisions with respect to the agronomic management. It is important to note that we see this potential contribution at different levels, not only in the frame of the CAP, which is a very direct application as we are seeing and we will see during the rest of the session, but also we see the importance of this data informing policy, taking decisions, and also as part of the support that we can provide for the management of the natural resources. No? We have been working to make a list or to make a table trying to summarize what are our interests. No? This table includes all the different interests of all the different colleagues working in different tasks or in different aspects. But this is worthy to say also that some of these elements we are presenting here are already under development, and we are following several initiatives, and as we will see later, where some of these needs are already covered or are in the process to be covered. I will come back to this point later. Well, in the area of forestry, we are mostly interested in mapping forested areas. Mapping forested areas mostly focusing in the land use. It is true, and we know that already exist several maps showing the forest area from a point of view or from a more land cover point of view. But it's important also to have in mind the importance of the land use. No? In respect to the forestry, we see a growing interest about product estimations of biomass production and phenology, because of the interest of these products to quantify what is the actual biomass storage, but also to see what is the potential production of the forest. And in a different element is to assess what is the vulnerability of forest respect to some elements like pest, but also respect to other risks like fire. We have interest we see a potential application in the use of remote sensing, in the use of Earth observation, to provide indicators to monitor and quantify the sustainable forest management. It is important, and we are in the process to analyze what is the potential contribution of these methodologies to the SM indicators, and to see where we can propose the use of these methodologies. No? In the area of biodiversity, we are interested in the use of remote sensing to support biodiversity monitoring at the landscape level. We are interested from one side in mapping the landscape, the famous landscape feature or landscape elements that contribute to the biodiversity, but also mapping and modeling what is the connectivity between the different elements of the landscape, and what is the contribution of the landscape itself to the biodiversity. No? Having in mind that a diverse landscape with different crops, different canopies, and different elements is itself a very valuable element for the biodiversity. Being more specific in this area of biodiversity, we are very interested in mapping wetlands and peatlands. In our view, the interest of this type of land covers is because of the protection of carbon-rich soils, and we see direct applications like in the CAP, but also is an important source of information for policy design. Finally, in the area of biodiversity, we see a growing interest to map semi-natural grassland pastures. No? Also because of the contribution of these land uses to the biodiversity. In the area of climate change, we see the growing interest to map land uses and management practices that can contribute to the assessment of emission removals from agricultural lands. There is also a growing interest because of the EU methane strategy to monitor the emission of methane in agricultural areas. And this is an area, this is a question that we have a lot of interest to understand what are the possibilities and if it is feasible to use remote sensing to monitor this kind of emission. No? And finally, a very important point for us is the potential use of remote sensing to monitor soil carbon content in agriculture, but also in other type of soils. Finally, respect to the area of more agriculture and agricultural management practices, we see a growing interest or growing necessity to map agricultural land uses. We are not talking about arable land. We are not talking about very specific agricultural covers, land covers. We need we need very good estimation of what is the total area and the distribution of agricultural land uses. Also, as mentioned during the previous presentations, we see a very direct application, very interesting application about the use of remote sensing to estimate or to quantify what is the amount of water used in agriculture. From one side, monitoring what is or identifying what are the irrigated areas, and from the other side, making quantitative estimations of the water used in agriculture. It is important also to understand and also to explore the area of the use of remote sensing for crop nutrient management. And specific questions that may be relevant for us is to have estimation of what is the use of fertilizers in agriculture. Going back a little bit or going deeper in this area of agricultural management and practices, we have interest to make the remote sensing products more available for farmers and to take advantage of this information to provide, not to provide by us, but to facilitate that the farmers can receive agronomic advice based on remote sensing. And specific areas that we see very relevant and also very feasible is the use of remote sensing for applications like water, fertilizers, and assessment of crop production, as we see during the presentations yesterday. In summary, not a conclusion, in summary, or to finalize this presentation, I want to say that we made the effort to put together all the different requirements or the different interests of the college working in this unit and in these areas. But it is true that several works or several ongoing works help us also to cover these requirements, and we are following with a lot of interest some developments in these areas, and we will see later during the other two presentations. No? Now, with the real conclusions, in our view, this kind of events or this kind of presentations, meetings, whatever, where we can obtain additional information about what's possible using remote sensing is a must. It's a must. We are always ready to provide and to describe what are all requirements in these fields, but also it's important to have in mind or to have a clear discussion about what are the level of consolidation of the product or what is the technical maturity of the product, because it helps us to a better definition of the needs also and to see what is the real application or the potential application for these products. No? Respect to our needs, it is important to say that some of the needs are simple products based on the existing data. But also additional applications, or we see that in the near future we will need additional data sources. I put here the example of medium high resolution thermal data, but there are many examples that has to be considered to make Earth observation really applicable and useful for these areas. As I commented, or as I mentioned it at the beginning, we see potential applications, or we see needs from the side of the Common Agricultural Policy, but also for other policies related with agriculture and forestry. Generally, some of these applications we can say that will be in the medium term, but also in the short terms, there are applications that are really feasible and can be exploited in really short term. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. And to wrap up my presentation, it's important to keep this contact, and it's important to have a clear overview about what are the actual possibilities of remote sensing for the policies where we participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isidro. Very interesting. I think to understand what are your needs on remote sensing, and that you have also areas of interest, including mapping and land use, and in particular for forest biodiversity and climate change. I think it will be very interesting to have also to understand the particular need. For example, what can Copernicus provide? Because remote sensing in the larger term, we can talk also about Copernicus. But for this, I think I will invite the next two speakers, which will present a little bit these aspects, what Copernicus can provide in terms of land and also on climate change. And I will move first to Chris Stenmans from the European Environment Agency. So Chris, you are the head of program at EAA, the European Environment Agency, and you are responsible for programming and the strategic development of EAA ICT and data and information services. Can you please tell us more about Copernicus-related activities in EAA and what exactly Copernicus Land Monitoring Service can provide in support of agricultural and agri-environmental indicators? Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan, and good morning to everybody. And I hope that the organizers can help me with moving forward the slides. Yeah, so what I will do the next 10 minutes is be complementary to what you heard yesterday from Michiel from the Joint Research Center, who is managing together with the European Environment Agency the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service, and more specifically how we are currently contributing to the work on agri-environmental indicators, and then specifically as well on what we see as the potential of the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so Michiel explained that all this data, as it was mentioned already, is freely and open available for whoever wants to use it, public and private sector. We structured that from the global to the local level. And what probably is most interesting for the discussion today is to give you a sketch on how we see the evolution in this Copernicus Land Monitoring Service, and how we see the contribution to what we call the green objectives that are put forward in the new Common Agricultural Policy. Next slide. And to do that, what I will do is highlight a few points based on the structure of our portfolio of the data and information services that you can find from Copernicus on land monitoring. Very specifically, if you look to the basic land cover land use change mapping, the main change now is that we move to a much higher resolution than what was available in the past for agri-environmental monitoring. We started 20 years ago already with colleagues in the Commission and the member states to work out this kind of topic. Covering land cover, some of you might recall. So we now moved into new products that are fit for purpose for multiple policy areas. On the basic mapping, what we call the CLC Plus is where we integrate now what you can monitor from space at a very high resolution with land use information. That means that it is now a much more advanced integration of data from a pure cover perspective with more the land use perspective, what is especially needed as well in the agriculture domain. Yeah, next slide. And I will give you a few examples. Take, for instance, what Sentinels now could offer on grassland monitoring. Grassland now, with Sentinel 1 and 2, you have now a very accurate delineation of grassland, where indeed you do not yet obtain the land use, to what extent the productivity is of each of these grasslands. And this is as well the kind of information that is not only needed for the greening of the Common Agriculture Policy, but also for other initiatives from Europe, not at least the European Green Deal. So where in the European Green Deal, we have now a number of priority topics like zero pollution, the biodiversity strategy, a new soil strategy probably that will be put in place together also with forest. So where we defining now the land monitoring service as a core service that can be used across the different policy domains. Yeah, next slide. And that will be as well also in the agriculture domain, where we have now a service on monitoring phenology, also at a very high resolution layer, that we are now trying to combine as well with crop monitoring, that at least we have now a much more timely, relevant information available across the different policy domains. Yeah, next slide. And what I will now do is focus then specifically on these agri-environmental indicators. Some of you are familiar with the ones that exist and that are made available to the Eurostat website. We have still currently 28 indicators that we want to improve, revise in line with the new CAP. From the very early days of Copernicus, we used already the land monitoring service, which was an initial operational service for instance, monitoring agriculture areas within the Natura 2000 site, and to see to what extent a policy related to protecting biodiversity is indeed functioning when it comes to especially looking into agriculture domain. It helped us as well on mapping high nature value farmland, as well as also elements, basic elements initially related to land use change. Yeah, next slide. But what now is required, if we look to the 9 key objectives that are now put forward, and we are looking especially in the next 7-year perspective, we would like now to make sure that we have a core service that will provide the data that is needed to address especially these 3 green objectives that here circulated in that you can see here with the green circle. The first one is on the climate action. So we see there the potential of the land monitoring service, how we can contribute, and now how the CAP will contribute to the climate change mitigations, the adaptations, as well as also the sustainable energy. That's as well with the biofuels, with all the forest management. It will be extremely important that we have the right data available to support this climate action. The same on the objective of the CAP on environmental care, where we are especially looking to foster sustainable development and an efficient management of natural resources, like for instance on water management, how to secure soil protection, also even on the air quality, because as it was mentioned already before, emissions and methane and others are quite important in securing as well the zero pollution targets that Europe is putting forward in the coming years. And then finally, on landscapes, there we see a very high potential of the land monitoring service to contribute to the protection of biodiversity, to enhance the ecosystem services, and especially as well to preserve the habitats and the landscapes that we have available, that we still have available in Europe. Next slide. Yeah, and I was very pleased that Isidro emphasized this point, is that the land monitoring service from Copernicus will only be successful if it can be done in combination with many new developments, what we call technical innovations, and to build this improved knowledge that is required. The data sharing issue that we tackled as well quite intensively recently together in Europe with the different commission services as well as with the member states. We see that will be a crucial element for success of the agri-environmental indicators we want to develop. The integration of this geospatial information together with the available statistical data, there as well, we think that a lot of progress is made, but still a long way to go to have a much more refining of statistical data that is available from the member states in Europe. And that will bring us then to the innovative approaches of monitoring, like it was mentioned with IoT, in bringing in citizen science, these elements as well. We take that already into account when we design the service evolution of the Copernicus land monitoring service to have integration of the different data sources to provide the end product. And not at least as well, at the end, we are also very pleased about the target that is put for fast broadband internet in rural areas, that we have 100% fully accessed by 2025, because all these different elements that are driven by different policy areas from the Commission need to find its place quite soon in the next decade. So next slide. Now, what I would just briefly now for the remaining time is just mention the importance of what we see of what we call this enhanced conditionality that is now proposed in the new COP. So where we are, where it's aiming for good agriculture and environmental conditions. And there we are currently in a discussion to look in these objectives for climate change, for water, for soil protections and quality and so on. What exactly are the gaps in data? To what extent can Earth observation and then specifically Copernicus contribute to have the right data sources on these different to have the information related to the different conditions? And I will just give you one example. Yeah, next slide. If you take, for instance, the issue of landscape, where we try to protect and preserve the valuable landscape diversity in the agriculture area, that's for biodiversity. Yeah, next. You will see now that so far what we could do with the Sentinel data is that you can indeed, we made some progress, but it's not sufficient and not accurate enough for how you can achieve how you can extract from satellite imagery in combination with in situ data the data that is required for this domain. Next. So what we did is we have been looking with colleagues and with partners within the Commission service, but as well with the industry, to figure out that what we achieved from data, the very high resolution data from Sentinels from 2018, so what would be needed, even up to sub-meter level, to respond to the demands that are put forward in the discussions for the new CAP. Next slide. And that leads then to this kind of analysis, where we look very into the individual small landscape features, whether it's stone walls, whether it's small streams, the hedgerows, the small ponds, the strips of patches of grasslands and flowers in fields. So to what extent, which imagery data need to be complemented with what kind of other data sources from in situ or from Earth observation to have the right package available to provide the indicators. Yeah, next slide. And that would bring me then to where we are now putting the focus for the further development of the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service, what we call the 2.0 in the frame of the next Copernicus program. So in the next 7 years, we want to secure, first of all, that we maintain the principle of what we call multi-purpose baseline data and core services. That means that we will provide data that can be used within the Common Agriculture Policy, as well as also in other policy initiatives related to energy, related to the farm to fork, for instance, where as well the health issues, the health strategy in Europe as well will be crucial, that the same data source can be used. We also want to make sure that we have maintenance of long-term sustainable time series. Because of course, very often with improving in technology, what decision makers at the end may need, and what we need also for the agri-environmental indicators, that we can do also the reanalysis, that we can have a solid basis for long-term time series, even going back to the 90s to see how especially in the environmental and the climate domain, how the evolution of Europe is happening in a sustainable way. Not at least improving the timeliness. That was one of the main criticisms that we had, I would say, not only in the start of making the operational use of Earth observation, but even in the first years of the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service, is that the timeliness is crucial. And that's, as it was presented by Michiel yesterday, now we even move up to near real time, where we have, in some cases, land cover related data that is now available within 12 hours after satellite data acquisition, or 24 hours. So that is the kind of improvements that we make into portfolio as well. And that will require us to make more intensive use of artificial intelligence, what the industry already is doing, who are working on the land monitoring services, not especially when it comes to the timeliness and the very high resolution data. You can imagine this is where indeed automation will be the key element to focus on as well in improving the production of the CLMS. Harmonization is also, because what you have seen from Isidro as well in the long list of user requirements, we need to make sure that we have coherence. Coherence, especially not only on a geographical scale perspective, but also from a definition, from a nomenclature point of view. And that's why as well we are, and we have been adjusting the Copernicus land monitoring portfolio to have applying to more international standards of land cover and land use classification. And at the end, as it was stressed, it's the user-oriented product access and distribution system, not at least where DIAS is playing the important elements, as well also the development of all applications to make it easy for the user from the level at the farm up to the decision making in Europe can be made available. And then finally, what I would like to repeat the same as what Michiel said yesterday about quality control. That remains for us a crucial element of an operational Copernicus land monitoring service. We need to make sure that we can have that we can provide full, reliable data that can be used not only here in this case for the common agriculture policy, but as well across the different policy domains in Europe, where at the end the ambition is to have an integrated policy approach in Europe. So next, and I would like to thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
I would like to thank you too, Chris. So it's very interesting to know what Sentinels at Copernicus can provide in terms of land monitoring. But you mentioned that it was mentioned already in some previous presentations that the land use aspect is a very important aspect, but also the weather and the climate side should not be neglected. So for this reason, I would suggest that we move with the next presentations so that we have some information about these aspects. But before this, I just want to remind the audience that you can ask questions. So they will be addressed at the end of the session. So you have a dedicated space on your interface where you can introduce your question, and you can even mention to whom the question is addressed. Maybe this will be easier also to address the question later on. So I will turn now to Ms. Chiara Cagnazzo from ECMWF, the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast. So Ms. Cagnazzo, you are a sectorial information system manager of the Copernicus Climate Change Service in ECMWF, and you are addressing the challenges of transforming user needs in different sectors into usable climate-derived information. So can you please share with the audience, with us, how the Copernicus climate change and the atmosphere services can support more resilient and sustainable farming? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. So, yes, I will try to summarize what the Copernicus Climate Change Service and the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, that are both operational services, offer to support policymakers and farmers toward a more climate resilient and sustainable agriculture, so within the Green Deal objectives. Next slide, please. So there are many challenges linking agriculture to climate variability and climate change. So first, the global food supply is vulnerable because a large fraction of the global food production is concentrated in specific and selected regions of the world. And then climate change is only one of the many pressures on agriculture, and this is even unevenly distributed across different regions. And then faced with growing global demand and competition for resources, the EU food production and consumption need to be seen in a kind of a broader context that links agriculture, energy, and food security. And finally, let's say that the long-term sustainable use of water resources is of growing concern, and there are strong links between agriculture and water availability and water quality. So in green, on the one side, we may say that agriculture is one of the most climate-dependent sector. But then, before reaching our plates, the food is produced, is stored, is processed, is transported. And at every of these stages, the food provisioning releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And farming, in particular, releases significant amounts of methane and nitrous oxide that are two powerful greenhouse gases. So just to simplify the max, on the other side, agriculture contributes to climate change, and I add here to air quality, but also to water and soil quality. So the bottom line message here is that agriculture has to improve its environmental performance through a more sustainable production methods, but on the other side, farmers have also to adapt to challenges from climate change, and they have to implement mitigation and adaptation actions. So Copernicus C3S and CAMS programs may support in finding adequate answers to those challenges. Next slide, please. Okay, so of course, the first ingredient is about the data, and of course, we are talking about both space data, but also models data. I focus here on the Copernicus Climate Change Service, C3S, that it's an operational program that provides free and open access to climate data at different timescales, as shown on the left-hand side of this slide. And it gives access in an authoritative and standardized way, together with open source software that was mentioned in the previous discussion at the center of this slide. And this is, of course, the purpose is to enable climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies by policymakers and businesses. So somehow C3S provides a link between the observations and model data on the left to the users that are on the right-hand side of this slide, many different users. And users need a kilobyte of information to manage climate risk. See, the program is operational, so it's not only providing data, data are maintained. So I mentioned here the continuity and consistency that was nicely discussed in the previous session. But information is also quality controlled, as also Chris was mentioning for the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. And there are important user support and training components. Next slide, please. So if we look at the agriculture sector, the service offers different products of different natures and different typology, covering different timescales. And here I focus on one element, that it is the global agriculture service. Next slide, please. So the service covers the local to the global scale. So information at what scale is needed, because nationally consumed crop production varies easily by 25% locally, but then globally it may vary of less than 3% with a quite uneven distribution. So we need to support both local to national decision makers and also international trade. So the information needs to be consistent from the local to the global scale. And the Global Agriculture Service addresses the needs of different communities. So on the top, you see the agri-research community that needs specific information, that needs data with global coverage, without gaps, and easy of use in the sense that has to follow specific standards. On the right, you see the agribusiness community that needs information in near real time. This was also another nice concept that was mentioned by previous speakers, at a high resolution with specific user interfaces. And on the left side, you see the agri-policy user that need a continuity versus policy cycles, need quality assured information again, and a service that guarantees that a chain of downstream models continue to work. So next slide, please. So I will quickly try to guide you with some examples. So, and first, I would like to mention just the typology of data that the service offers. So first, we have climate forcing data. These are ready for crop models running, so mostly downscaled and bias corrected. And this is information based on reanalysis and available in near real time. We also have specific water-based indicators. Next, please. And agroclimatic indicators that cover climate projections, so based on different policy scenarios until 2100. And next slide, please. Climate-enhanced Earth observation-based indicators, so for crop-specific, for example. Next, please. Those data are aggregated for crop-specific phenological calendars, but also for crop-specific growing areas. Next slide, please. Sorry. Yeah. So I will show just one specific example that is based on this first and fourth typology of data, and this is the soybean case. Okay, we know that just quite recently we were not really aware of the level of risk we are exposed in the global production of specific crops. Soybean is an example, but for example, recently what happened is also the price of hazelnuts has risen very rapidly because of the droughts in Turkey, for example. So why the soybean? The soybean is one of the most widely grown crops. It is used both for food and feed because of the high protein and oil content. And the variability in the soybean production and its quality is caused by weather conditions during the growth season. And this is one of the major causes of the soybean price volatility. Next. Thank you. So the major production plants need to have information first on where and when it is expected to occur a production of the soybean for major production areas, but also they need to know how much expected production in order to have a better logistics of transport. Next slide, please. And so this is just a snapshot that focuses on the US, but the information is available all over the globe at the same resolution. So from the data, for example, it is possible to estimate where and when to expect an advanced development crop stage. For example, in red, we have a quite mature crop. Next. But also we need an estimate on how much to expect relative to the previous year. This is just an example. Next, please. And for a good farm logistics and water management, we need also information about how much water is needed. And next is an example of the actual crop evapotranspiration that is used to estimate the irrigation water requirement. Next slide, please. So the users of these informations are, on the one side, commodity traders, food and feed processing industry, food security. Next. But also farmers and water manager. Next slide, please. So for the water managers specifically, we have also other operational services. In this case, the operational service for the water sector that focuses at the European scale. So in this case, this service delivers information on climate change in water-related variables, but also made at a seasonal time scale by using hydrological seasonal forecasts. Next slide, please. So to summarize, C3S offers some specific products, but also highly relevant data to this community. Next, on the top, you may see the reanalysis, those maps without gaps at a high resolution of all atmospheric variables at the global and at the regional scale. And here I would like to link to the long-term consistency and continuity that was mentioned in the previous discussion this morning with Jean-Luc. But it also offers, next please, information for the multimodal seasonal forecast data. Yesterday, we have had a short introduction of the multimodal seasonal forecast by Anka Brukshaw at ECMWF. So potentially, this may be really highly relevant for determining, for example, yield predictions, price setting of food communities. Next. And climate projections data also are relevant at high resolution based on regional climate models at the European scale or general circulation models at the global scale. And somehow following these policy climate change scenarios. And most importantly, we offer tools to operate on the data. Next. Finally, I would like to mention here that those data are also used to support the climate adaptation activities in Europe through the interface between the C3S and the Climate Adapt portal with the European Environment Agency. And we connect also to the Agri-Adapt Life initiative. Next slide, please. Here, instead, I would like to mention a few words what the Copernicus offers from the atmosphere monitoring service. So here, the link between the air pollution and the agriculture policies passes through those concepts. First, ammonia air emissions because of fertilizers and livestock, and the agriculture accounts for about 90% of ammonia emissions. And air policies set national emission for ammonia. The second point is that crop exposed to tropospheric ozone concentrations show a reduction by 5 to 15% of yield. And the third point is that methane emitted by agriculture is both an ozone precursor, but also powerful greenhouse gas. And I'm going to show you just a couple of examples. In the next slide, please. Here, I focus on the monitoring of the surface ozone. So CAMS provides annual European air quality reanalysis and reports. And the maps here show an ozone indicator that it's an accumulated ozone over a certain threshold from May to July. And this indicator shows a very high exposure of the European ecosystems. And this is not decreasing in spite of policies so far. Especially, the ozone level did not decrease in the last 20 years over Europe, with a cost for the agriculture estimated as 4.6 billion a year in Europe. Next slide, please. And it's my last slide. The second example focuses on producing long-term emission mitigation scenarios for year 2050, and 4 different scenarios are here produced. The first one is the current legislation scenarios on the bottom left, and those are maps of the surface ozone. The second one is the agriculture scenario, where reduced emissions from agriculture sector are applied. And then there are 2 very ambitious scenarios: the health scenario, where additional reductions in all sectors are applied, except the agriculture one. And the third one is the maximum feasible reduction scenarios in all sectors. So those last 2 ones show really a substantial reduction in the ozone level at the surface. And the most ambitious scenarios in terms of NOx emissions reductions show this very large reduction in the ozone level. So this was my last slide. Next one is just to please tell you to come and to follow us on the Copernicus C3S and CAMS websites. So we offer really a lot of further information relevant to the forestry, to the renewable energy, biodiversity, and I'm really happy to see that we may offer a lot of information based also on what Isidro presented just before me. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Chiara. I think the slides will be distributed anyway, so the people can see the details and also what you mentioned in the last slide, so they can visit also the website. I think it's very interesting from your presentation and also from the previous presentations to understand how much remote sensing can contribute to agriculture, how much science and technology we need. I'm sure that our grandfathers were not even imagining how difficult it will be to grow a soybean in 2020. Well, we have all these technologies and we have to use them at the maximum. We are a bit short on time, so I would suggest that we move to the 6 panelists as announced previously. We will have time probably for some questions at the very end, but now allow me please to start with our first panelist, who is Mr. Jean-Michel Terret, who works in the European Commission in DG JRC. So, Mr. Terret, you are leading a group of researchers dealing with the analysis of the impact of agriculture on the environment, and you are working in particular on aspects that are related to biodiversity and landscape. You have been involved since several years in the landscape feature mapping, and we will be interested to learn more if the monitoring of landscape features in agriculture land represents a big challenge today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you for the introduction. And I'll give in this short time just some information on the challenge of monitoring this landscape feature at European level. So next slide, please. Thank you. So, indeed, societal expectations about agricultural production are changing, and there are increased now demands on the issues such as food safety and on impact of agriculture on the environment. This change has been reflected in the very recent European Green Deal action, especially through the farm to fork, as well as the biodiversity strategies and their related targets. Of which, for example, for landscape feature, it's about 10% of agricultural land under high diversity landscape. Next slide, please. However, information on these issues at pan-European level is rather incomplete or sometimes even lacking, and this hinders the required monitoring and evaluation of policies. For many of the European landscape, quantitative knowledge is missing, or there is a lack of comparable data among member states, and very often also a lack of time series. Next slide, please. Moreover, even within a single landscape region, there are a large variety of features in agricultural land, such as copses, field margin, hedgerows, trees in line, ditches, terrace, which make it very difficult for an exhaustive inventory over the whole of EU. Next slide, please. And so given diversity of this feature and their often narrow and heterogeneous size and shape, a pan-European level assessment shall combine the full capability of the spatial coverage of Earth observation with the capability of categorization coming from field survey or field surveyors. And for that reason, a specific module for landscape feature is under development for the next Lucas 2022 survey, which is based on the photo interpretation of very high resolution orthophoto, even below 20 centimeters of resolution, and also follow with a field survey. The sampling scheme will be based on the Lucas point framework, around which quadrats of subpoint will be surveyed. Next slide, please. So the idea there will be to combine the best of the two approaches. It was already mentioned by previous speaker on combining Earth observation with statistical inventory. So this is planned in this case. So the best of the two approaches will combine Copernicus, a small woody feature layer, which provide the exhaustivity of the coverage for the woody feature, with the Lucas landscape feature module for its characterization capabilities, and also that because it covers non-woody part of the landscape feature. Therefore, please note that could be also additional source of data to reduce the cost of the data collection, which is under research now at the GRC. And for example, the use of geotag photo to identify landscape feature using deep learning processes and artificial intelligence. And then we can go to my last slide, the take-home message. So Earth observation capability and computer technologies allows very exhaustive recording of relevant environmental processes. However, operational landscape application at EU level still need to be improved and fully validated. From the Copernicus small woody feature, the good point of that data set are the wall-to-wall layer and the connectivity aspect. Classification still needs some improvement, and also so far the non-woody feature are not yet fully implemented. From the Lucas landscape feature module, we can get accurate thematic information through the field survey, and also it provides some very relevant information on the non-woody feature, which are quite important in the total of the landscape feature. So the conclusion will be that combining the two may improve and are even necessary to achieve a good quality in terms of pan-European quantitative information on landscape feature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. It's very interesting to understand that the combination of different data sources is important, and also the fact that you need also in situ data, which was already mentioned in advance. So remote sensing is nice, but it also requires some in situ measurements. Well, we may have some questions. Probably, I just want to move now to the next speaker, and then probably we'll come back again with some more details. I will invite Mr. Simon Kay from the European Commission, DG Climate. So, Mr. Kay, you worked in the Land and Use Finance for Innovation unit. Sorry if I'm a bit wrong. So it's in DG Climate, as I said. So you work on EU policies. It will be interesting to have also this policy aspect to understand a little bit more. How do you make the link between agriculture needs and climate needs?
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction. Indeed, I'm in DG Klima in the Land Use and Finance for Innovation. That's a whole different part of the story, but let's focus on the land use side here a little bit. So I'm going to do very much a zoom out in this sort of 3 or 4 minutes that I'm going to talk, and put in context a little bit the climate parts that's been picked up by several speakers during the morning. And I think we can show that there's a really very powerful interest with respect to where climate policy is headed. So to bring everybody a little bit up to date, perhaps maybe this group is a bit less aware than others. it's not particularly focused on the radar maybe, about the climate neutral ambitions of the EU by 2050. So there have been a proposal, or two proposals really next year, one for 2050 to balance emissions and removals, so the absorption of greenhouse gases, to get a neutral balance by 2050. And what we're really working on at the moment is to achieve another European Green Deal promise, which was to look at how to get by 2030 a reduction on that pathway towards this balance. And the proposal made by the Commission back last September was to have a net reduction target of at least 55% reductions by 2030, compared to 1990, if you're interested. Now, what does this mean? It means that the net emissions and removals of greenhouse gas on land, so land use change, agriculture, forestry, settlements, wetlands, that these are part and parcel of the whole reduction framework. To put it very simply, up until today, more or less this year, land use change was dealt with separately. So the proposal is very much to bind this into the same metric that is used for this 55% target. And hopefully when you get the presentation, you can click on that link and see a little bit more behind that, some fact sheets to explain it in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? Well, it means that there needs to be a reduction of emissions, but you'll see that this graph goes, the y-axis goes from 0 to 100%, but it also goes negative. And the negative numbers are where land, generally speaking forest, but not only, the potential is not only with forests, it's also with agricultural land. There's absorption of greenhouse gases taking place. And yep, the idea is to follow that red line until we get to 2050 when it gets to 0, and schematically by 2030 at 55%. Just press one more and we get a zoom in on the second half. There we go. So what does this mean? Well, I've managed, I think, to keep the legend just below. It means that by 2030, if you look at the bit below, which is land use change and forestry, so this is all the land component of greenhouse gas fluxes, and you look at what is happening above the line, you have related to agriculture and the land component in general, you have about a 20% of the greenhouse gases that are being measured and monitored in this whole policy framework are related to land and land use. And by the time we get to 2050, it's much, much bigger. The greenhouse gases, so the flux, the change that's being monitored is probably something in the order of 80%. So it's really critical that we start to grasp this very seriously. Yes, there's also, was presented a little bit just before, issues related to climate adaptation, issues related to productivity and understanding what's happening with droughts, etc. But just to pick up on three messages, if you like. The first is that the CAP is the proposal that is under discussion at the moment in the trilogues. 40% of the funding behind payments is what we call mainstream, so basically justified policy-wise by climate. So that's quite a lot of money of the 41 billion presented earlier by Jean-Luc. 20% of the gases by 2030, 20% of this flux exchange that needs to be monitored will be linked to land and land use. So if we get it wrong with respect to land and land use, it will have a big impact on the overall number that we come out with respect to, are we doing the right thing with respect to that target? And a final point is that already today in the legislation, there is a requirement for member states to have what we call a geographically explicit means of collecting their data that they use for this. So we don't impose them sort of climate LPIS or a climate biodiversity system, monitoring system, but what we expect is that the systems that exist, whether they're for landscape features, or for the CAP, or for crop monitoring, or aid applications, that these are able to be synergized and used together with Copernicus services, absolutely, in order to be able to bring together and improve these estimates. So we have that. We're doing a proposal at the moment for how to upgrade the LULUCF regulation, and we're going to reinforce these connections. So just to emphasize that really everything we've been discussing this morning is really, really very crucial and important for the way forward on climate as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Simon. You talked about how important it is to grasp this fact that we have to reduce the green gas emissions. And I think we are all serious about this. I think we understand all, and it was presented already in the previous presentation that agriculture is also one of the contributors to this. And I hope that, as you say, by 2050, we'll have really the negative aspect of these greenhouse gases. And I will be happy really if Copernicus and Earth observation can contribute to this. I will now move to the next speakers, which will present more the research and the industrial aspects of this topic. So I will start first with Mr. Eric Sechia, who is a senior scientist in INRAE. So this is the French National Institute of Research for Agriculture, Food and Environment in CESEBIO, the Center for Special Studies of the Biosphere. I will not explain what exactly CESEBIO is. It's a joint research unit in France. So Mr. Sechia, could you explain what you are doing and how this can support the needs and what was presented already in the previous presentations? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ivan. So I will present what we're doing within the frame of the NIVA project together with my colleagues from INRAE, IGN, and the French paying agency on the agro-environmental indicators for the CAP. So our objectives are to propose some annual indicators in order to measure the impact of agricultural practices on the environment based on the published scientific methods and former EU projects. And those indicators are calculated based on Sentinel data and other data that are widely available in Europe, like the IAX data, meteorological and soil maps, and some indicators need FMIS, access to FMIS for the farming practices. We selected some indicators based on the discussion with key stakeholders, especially the European Commission. We had first proposed a set of 13 candidate indicators, but we decided that we should have 3 in priority. One addressing carbon storage, the other one related to nitrate lixiviation risk, and the last one is about biodiversity, because they address 3 of the main CAP objectives. Those indicators can be computed at various, what we call tiers, meaning levels of complexity. Tier 1 is easily feasible, less accurate, of course, but rather operational. Tier 2 provide better results, but require additional data, such as climatic data or farmers' data. And those 2 are based on some empirical approaches, while Tier 3, based on modeling approach, provide, of course, best results, but is less operational currently. Very quickly, the Tier 1 approach that I will present first is addressing net CO2 fluxes, which is one of the 3 components of the carbon budget. The 2 others being required to calculate a carbon budget is the amount of carbon that is exported at harvest by the farmers and the organic amendments. So Tier 2 and 3 will address the carbon budget, accounting for those 3 terms, and the 2 last come from farmers' data. So how do we calculate those indicators? So we already developed on the left a tool, an executable tool that is very easy to install and run, that needs as input the LPIS and some NDVI time series that are based on the Sentinel-2 data, and that allows to produce some net annual CO2 maps at the plot scale, You see on this example some CO2 fixation on green plots and emissions on the red plots. And also this approach is based on the empirical relationship that we observed on many sites in Europe between the number of days of active vegetation and net annual CO2 fluxes. It is currently being tested in 4 member states within the frame of this project. And we also developed food processing chain called AgriCarboneo that can be used to produce in a similar way this tier 1 carbon indicator, and that can produce also a tier 2 plot maps, meaning carbon budget, similar to the one you see on the left, but corresponding to carbon budgets, but that requires some access to the FMIS data, and that's why we are currently developing some API in order to feed this FMIS interface box for those data we need concerning amendments and yield, for instance, in order to finalize the calculation of the carbon budgets. And finally, we have recently, developed a tier 3 approach based on the agrometeorological model that we call SAFI-CO2 that assimilates some leaf array index temporal series produced with the Parcel model, and that can produce some biomass CO2 flux estimates at plot or pixel level that can be then injected in the soil module in order to produce some pixel or plot scale carbon budget maps, as well as their uncertainties, as you can see on the bottom right image. We of course developed this in the perspective of being able to couple that to the Sen4Cap tool, meaning that the Sen4Cap could provide to the SAFI-CO2 model the leaf array index time series to calculate the components of the carbon budget. So here is an example of what we recently produced over the Netherlands with our partners from NIVA. And you can see here all over the Netherlands a map of the net CO2 flux at plot scale with a zoom showing well where are the plots that are absorbing CO2, which is good for climate, and the one that are losing CO2. So a few words concerning the progress concerning the other indicators on which we are working. Concerning risk of nitrate leaching, which will be coded soon in the AgriCarboneo processing chain, it will produce some plot scale estimates of this indicator with a tier 1 approach that is requires to know what is the previous crop and in order to estimate what is the mineralization of crop residues that will release nitrogen in the soil, and then we use the LPS data also in order to estimate how much nitrogen will be uptaken from the soil, and we consider the presence of catch crops and the efficiency in nitrogen uptake by mapping them through the Sentinel data. The tier 2 approach will be the same as tier 1, but it will be more accurate because it will consider some climatic data and also possibly the information concerning the catch crop type provided by the FMIS. And last, about biodiversity indicator that will be soon tested in France. It is calculated at a landscape level. The idea is to compare the biodiversity at the farm level with the surrounding environment. And the tier 1 approach is based on the estimation of the proportion of the semi-natural habitats in the landscape and at the farm level. Tier 2 accounts for the type of semi-natural habitats like woods, edges, ponds, and Sentinel data are used to estimate the presence of cover crops, where, when, and finally tier 3 is the same as tier 2, but it can benefit from data concerning pesticides intensity of application through the FMIS data. So in conclusion, we have been working on 3 indicators that are addressing 3 categories of environmental issues and ecosystem services that can be calculated at pixel, plot, or landscape levels that are related to several impact indicators. They are based on Sen4Cap standards, and developed in open source. The tier 1 could be easily implemented everywhere thanks to the IX data and the Sentinel data, and we already have an operation tool concerning the CO2 indicator. Tier 2 is still under development because it requires access to the FMIS data. And that's something that could be calculated at the state level, for instance, and it will, of course, depend on the objectives and the efforts of the member states to develop those indicators. And Tier 3, based on the model, offers high level of accuracy, but it can provide additional indicators that are of interest for the CAP, like yield estimates, evapotranspiration. It can allow to calculate the specific effect of cover crops on soil carbon storage, for instance. Of course, it needs additional data from the FMIS, pedoclimatic data, and it still requires some research in order to parameterize new crop, because so far we only have the 4 main crops in Europe: wheat, sunflower, maize, and rapeseed. And within the frame of NIVA, we will analyze the transposability of this approach to other areas in Europe. And in the future, probably this agri-carbon processing chain could be used as a generic toolbox coupled to Sen4 CAP or in a standalone mode in order to calculate some carbon and nitrogen indicators from Tier 1 to Tier 3 in a nested approach, since Tier 1 can be applied to pretty much all the crops species that we found in Europe except rice. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Eric. I will really move quickly to the next speaker, and then we'll see if we have time for a bit more details after that. So I will turn now to Mr. William Clements, who is the CTO and the co-founder of RISE AG, a Paris-based startup providing financing services for European farmers. So Mr. William, you are responsible for developing a tool to make the appropriate financing services affordable and scalable to farmers who adopt sustainable practices via certified carbon credits. So this includes also Copernicus data, and I'm glad that you are here today with us to present another vision of the link between the climate and agriculture. And what is your experience? And can you tell us more about your experience with paying farmers for sustainable practices using carbon credits?
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Ivan. Next slide, please. So RISE indeed is developing financing services for sustainable agriculture in Europe via carbon credits. And our approach is to leverage technological tools to build trust in our carbon credits and scalability of the carbon credit generation service. Next slide, please. So what we do is that we connect two populations, farmers on the one hand who are willing to implement carbon levers on their farm to reduce their carbon footprint, and on the other hand, carbon credit buyers. So what we do in between is that, first of all, we collect data from farmers. Using that data, we calculate their carbon footprint and the credits that can be generated by reducing their footprint, so either reducing their emissions or increasing carbon stored in soils. We also monitor projects using various sources, including Copernicus data, certify the carbon credits that are generated using national and international certification frameworks, and sell those carbon credits to carbon credit buyers, which are either companies or other institutions, and pay the farmers using the proceeds from those carbon credit sales. So from the point of view of farmers, we act as a private sector payment agency where they commit to adopting certain farming practices for a given amount of time. They send us data and documents allowing them to prove that they did indeed do this, allowed to be audited, and receive payment in exchange. Next slide, please. So to go into a bit more detail about this payment scheme and about how Copernicus data is involved. So in order to generate certified carbon credits, farms commit to a set of practices for 5 years. And these credits are certified after third-party audits at the end of the project. Now we use Copernicus data for 3 things. First of all, to measure relevant data. For example, for carbon storage in soils, cover crop biomass and crop residues play a very important role. And that is data that is often not collected by farmers, but that could be collected using Copernicus data. And combined with other regulatory data that farmers provide, we can get a fuller picture of a farm's climate impact. The second reason that Copernicus data is used is in order to provide timely payments for farmers. So instead of having to wait until farmers provide paper evidence, or even worse, third-party audits at the end of the project, by providing ongoing monitoring of what farmers are doing, we can provide payments every year that finance their sustainable practices. The third reason we use Copernicus data is to guarantee impact on every farm. That's because audits typically only inspect square root of n farms, but by monitoring every farm, we're able to build trust in the carbon credits for buyers, and thus be able to sell more credits and provide those services to a larger number of buyers. Next slide, please. So to conclude, what we've developed is a demonstration of a result-based payment schemes for farmers' climate impact that uses Copernicus data. I think as more and more farmers start receiving payments via carbon credits, it'll be interesting to see how the Common Agricultural Policy can interact with this private sector payment scheme. Now we know there's support from Copernicus Incubation for this this company, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Willem. Anyway, I think you provided your contact details, so I'm sure that if there are people, they can contact you for more details. I suggest that we continue and we stay again in the domain of payment, but this time we'll have also with us Miss Maria Gonzalez Dugo, who is a research scientist in the Institute of Agriculture and Fisheries Research and Training, which is part of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development of Andalusia in Cordoba, in Spain. So, Ms. Gonzalez Dugo, you have extensive experience in vegetation monitoring and estimation of water, energy, and carbon exchanges using remote sensors. Apparently, one of your current activities is a project on results-based payments for ecosystem services. So, can you tell us more on this? I think your microphone is muted. No, so we don't hear you now. Yeah, no. If you wish, we can move to the next speaker, and maybe you can check in the meantime. Okay, so let's do it this way probably. So the next speaker was supposed to be the last one, but now we move a bit. Is Mr. Stefan Erasmi from the Thunen Institute in Germany, which is the Federal Research Institute for Rural Area Forestry and Fisheries. So, Mr. Erasmi, you are the coordinator of the working group Thunen Earth Observation, and you are responsible for the development of special indicators and services that support MRV obligations in the agriculture at national and international level. So it will be interesting to learn more about the national monitoring of agriculture indicators that you are working on at the Thunen Institute, and to see also the other side, how could the indicators that will be provided by the CAP area monitoring system contribute to the monitoring obligations?
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Next slide, please. Just a very quick overview of Thunen Institute. We are a federal research institute of Ministry of Food and Agriculture, mainly involved in national and EU-wide evidence-based policy advice and research for competitive economy in agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. So one of our main tasks is the impact assessment of the CAP at national and international level, considering both pillars of the CAP, the first and the second, with regard to the impact of adaptations and policy measures. Next, please. So within this context, the remote sensing contributes to the impact assessment on one side, through the delivery of area-wide and objective information at national level. And on the other side, Thunen is also responsible for delivering base information for several monitoring obligations at national and international level related to framework conventions like, for example, the UNFCCC, the Climate Action Plan that was already mentioned, and National Forest Inventory and Biodiversity Strategy and others. To do this, we built up our own data processing and then archiving infrastructure that is based on a national DIAS platform that is built by the German Aerospace Center, and we are also using DataCube, where we store a national archive of all Sentinel-2 and Landsat reprocessed data. So in the next slide, please, I give a short introduction in one of those monitoring programs that we are involved, which is the monitoring of biological diversity, where we answer questions about the general relations between biodiversity in the agricultural landscape and the production, the land use intensity, the structural changes, based on a general framework that you can see here in the left part of the slide. And that is based on an area-wide assessment of state and pressure indicators of land use intensity, and landscape diversity. And when you look at the state and pressure indicators, you realize that many of them were already mentioned today and also yesterday and in the different sessions and talks, and they are very close to indicators that are provided in other programs from other systems, like the Copernicus Land monitoring service, like already available services like Sen4CAP, ongoing projects like NIVA. And our approach is to make use, of course, of this available data to derive those indicators, but also to ensure the reliability and validity of the indicators by developing our own approaches. And in the right-hand side, you can see one example of such a pressure indicator that we map at national level, the grassland use intensity. So the question is, how do we map grassland use intensity? The answer is we monitor the mowing events, as has also been shown in previous talks. And so what is different here with regard to other projects is that we are working at the pixel level, and comparable to others, also aggregate at the parcel level. So the next, please. And in the last slide, I want to build the bridge to the CAP monitoring. So how can we combine our approaches within national monitoring mandates with the foreseen CAP area monitoring system? Because we have large overlaps, and it has already been mentioned that the area monitoring system is also envisioned to support environmental and climate policy objectives at national level through adaptation of the output indicators. And this is what we're actually trying to start to do in close agreements between the federal states and the government, because in Germany we have this special situation that the paying agencies are not at the ministry level, but at the level of the federal states. So it means we need to build up close agreement for exchange and sharing of knowledge in order to build up a national monitoring system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. It's interesting. I think you have also this difficulty that not only we have to coordinate it at national level, but you have also to coordinate it internally at subnational level.
Yes.
Okay, that's the pleasure to live also in Europe, I think, and this diversity. So I will just check with Maria if she's back and if she can, well, if we can hear us, because apparently you can hear us.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, a bit. Yeah, it's a bit low, but
Okay, I can try to talk.
yeah. Okay, you can.
Thank you. I'm so sorry for this.
No, it's okay. I think that's what, before we were depending on flights, now we are depending on microphones. So
yeah, that's true. Well, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be part of this session. I am going to present a particular case of the use of Copernicus in results-based payments for ecosystem services. If you go to the next slide, please. The main objective of this project is to assess new policy instruments to promote the provision of ecosystem services by agricultural areas. And we are mostly focusing on results-based approaches, which are approaches in which the payment is linked to the farmer's performance, to the performance on providing these services. And if you go to the next one, please. Yes, we face two main challenges to implement these schemes of payment. The first one is to design systems in which farmers are willing to participate. So if it's a voluntary system, so farmers need to like it and be sure that it has a good results for them. So we are using experimental economics, in particular choice experiments, to do that. And the second challenge is what I think it has been mentioned here before this morning several times. We would like to measure ecosystem services at adequate temporal and spatial scale and also with low cost. But we cannot measure it directly. So we need to test different proxies that are linked to these ecosystem services and that are based on massive data that we can use. We have seen the Land Copernicus service, the climate service. This is the information in which we base the implementation. If you go to the next one, the next slide, please. Yes, thanks. We are focusing this work into target ecosystems, which is the olive oak groves and also the oak savanna, what we call the ESA. We have seen the picture before. This is both systems share a similar structure, with a very remarkable three-dimensional structure with scattered trees and a background of grassland or crop or cereal crops. And both of them are very challenging for remote sensing monitoring because they have large variability. The several vegetation layers which have different temporal dynamics along the year. Both of them are very, the growth, the biomass accumulation is controlled by water availability most of the year. And both of them are very extensive, cover a large area in the south of Spain. That is the region where we are implementing these schemes. We are focusing on 4 ecosystem services. As you can see in the screen, is carbon sequestration, soil conservation, soil protection, biodiversity, and also landscape aesthetic. If you go to the next one, it's the last one. This is a work in progress. We have selected a number of pilot farms which share climate and soil properties, but they have a different management history, because in both systems, management is very important to accomplish a number of ecosystem services. There are many management options in these systems, and depending on the management, the provision of these ecosystem services is one or another. We are doing field measurements, soil organic carbon, CO2 fluxes, biomass, etc. And we have also selected an initial set of remote sensing-based indicators. I put here some examples, but there are some others. And we are going to test it. And we are also developing toolboxes, one for each system, just to provide advice to the farmers that which management practice are related to specific ecosystem services, so that if they want to increase the provision of these services, they have to select a number of practices. we're not controlling the practices, but we're providing the farmers information so that they can combine the best practices for their goal. And we are also implementing a drought safeguarding system, because in this environment, in this region, drought is a serious problems, and we think that the farmers can be more willing to participate if they have like a safety net, so that they know that there is a extreme situation one day, then the provision of the services cannot be accomplished, and this is taken into account. And that's all. Thanks. Thank you. Next one, just to say thank you, and you have my email address, and you can contact us if you want more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I would like also to say thank you to you and also to all the speakers. But we are over time. But if you allow me, I would like to deep a little bit on what was said, and maybe address at least 2-3 questions from the audience. So I would ask our team, supporting team, to share them. But in the meantime, maybe I'll ask also the speakers if you have any reactions to what was said, maybe to the others, and if you would like to add something on top of this. Don't see any reaction. Okay. I will then move to the questions and try to answer as much as possible, given the short time we are left. So I will start with the most popular one, which is there a place where we can find results of research for all these presented DG Agri objectives in the context of remote sensing data? So I think Isidro maybe can answer this if I'm not wrong. You're still here with us.
No, actually, I don't fully understand the question, because he's asking at the same time about research results and objectives, of DG Agri. But in general, what I'm presenting is not the needs of DG Agri in terms of remote sensing data or result. I'm presenting partially the needs for my unit, which is working on questions related with environment and climate. The point is, and I think that this workshop was very, very clear to show that different departments, let's say, or different work lines has different requirements, and our needs are not the same that the needs for other colleagues and for other angles of the policy. Respect to the result of research project, it can be found in the web, looking for results of H2020 or other programs projects. No.
Okay. And while you're on the line, maybe there is another question. It's not even a question. I think it's more for information about high resolution thermal data. Are you aware? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just yet. So you don't need to answer. Yeah. So I will move then to Simon. So I see that you have. I would just say I will skip the question to Chris, because he informed me that he had another meeting, so he left already. But we'll take this question and we'll try to answer in a written format. So Simon, you see the question: how the carbon farming sequestration is planned to be implemented to help to achieve the climate objectives? Sorry, it is moving at the same time I'm reading.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think actually we had a very nice little complimentary presentation just now about how, let's say it's from a little bit the other end of the telescope, how the tools that are related to remote sensing and Copernicus could help carbon farming and sequestration. But if we look at the slightly broader context of carbon farming, we definitely feel that this is a very important tool to leverage action. The regulations that we have at the moment really focus on member states. The CAP, of course, should drill down a little bit further. It should start through some of the instruments that are within the scope of what member states can do, what we call eco schemes, even RDP schemes, where farmers can be encouraged, even compensated further to actually do carbon farming. So that would be sequestering carbon in soils, doing things better, reducing emissions from cropland, for example. We've got a report that is about to come out where we look at different types of carbon farming schemes. So we look at wetlands, we look at agroforestry, we look at 5 different cases. It'll be published very soon, I hope in the next couple of weeks, on the DG Klima website. So keep an eye on that. Also on our Facebook and Instagram, probably we have it coming up, certainly a Twitter account. But we also are planning a communication towards the end of the year to try and develop our ideas. So we have still a way to go before we get to the point of understanding how this framework can be put together. To point also to another presentation that was made about the certification of this work. I think that's a very important point as well. How do we certify that removals inland, but also removals that are technology based, can be used in a framework of the whole accounting? And I actually posed a similar question on that. Don't suppose it's been voted up, but indeed, how do you identify that what has been done by on this farm, on this piece of land, how this contributes to an overall target? So all these things have to be developed over the next couple of years. Communication probably with some ideas by the end of this year, some case studies by the end of the month, I hope, and in 23 probably an overall framework for certifying carbon removals. But I think underpinning all these things is how you monitor them and how you monitor them on land. It's got to be related to the Earth observation tools that we have, like we have through Copernicus. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Simon. It was an extensive answer. I think we'll have no time to take more questions. That is just to say that we'll try to answer the questions in written, and we'll provide also some useful links in the answers. I think we have also the latest one is to share also the results of the polls. So maybe our colleagues can share this if I'm not wrong. So should we expect to see the results, or we
Yeah,
can
we have a
close?
small technical issue. We'll try to show you in a couple of seconds.
Okay, sorry. So maybe we can come back then to this question. Was the latest one about the level of the cap, which was on which level they will be, the results will be applied on nuts 1, 2, or 3. So maybe Isidro, I don't know if you have seen the question. Maybe if you can answer in the meantime.
Sorry, which question?
There was one last question. I don't remember exactly what was, but it was about the application of the cap monitoring at regional level. So it was the question about nuts 1, 2, or 3. Yeah.
I read it in my knowledge. The CAP indicators are reported at the level of the member states. So, but this is, I mean, again, this is different. The data is reported at the level of the member state, but the data is composed by different components. Let's say, no, it's not a matter to make an estimation of something only at the level of the member state.
Okay. Thanks. So let's go quickly through the results. I think you've probably seen them already. They are still moving. So which session deserve more attention and follow-up from the Commission? So we have on top the session number 3, then session 4, then 2, and then number 1. So this is the point taken. I think we'll look at this. So next one is, in which session do you see a predominant role for the Sentinel's data? Again, number 3 is the cap crop monitoring. Then number 4 is environmental, climate, etc. Then we have number 1 and 2. So I see people are still voting. So it's good. I think they are still involved. Then in which session do you see, in which session do you see more support from the Copernicus services and their products? So here we have again 3 and 4 more or less at the same level. So with 3 with just 3% more than session number 4, and then number 2, and the last one is number 1. In which topic session do you see a predominant role for the private sector? So now we have a bit of a change. So number 2 is on the farmers level support, which will require predominant role the private sector. Then number 1, agriculture market monitoring. For the third one is the CAP crop monitoring, and at the end, environment, climate, forest, and bioeconomy. So do we have more?
No, this was all.
Oh, okay. Okay, so okay, nice to see the results. So I think with this we can conclude the session and also the whole workshop. So I hope that this was very informative for you. As I said, the presentations will be available later on, and we'll summarize and answer as much as possible to all questions that stayed unanswered. So with this, I would like to thank you and wish you a nice day and good continuation. Thank you.